This is disc number 7.
This was when I happened to walk by, and so I asked the woman what she wanted. She explained that she'd been informed that Georg was a deaf-mute by heredity, and that this is why she needed to look into his case. I asked who had told her this, but she replied she wasn't allowed to tell me. I explained to her, as pleasantly as I could, that Georg had been made hard of hearing due to complications at birth, but that his twin sister was in perfect health, something which argues against any hereditary cause. Then I made a big point of telling her that I'm a trained doctor and not in need of her help, and that there are plenty of other people in far greater need of medical support. She went away then, but I can't put it out of my mind, and when I spoke to some of the other parents from Georg's school, I found out that a lot of the older children have been called for sterilization. But the worst thing is what happened to Martin Wessel. He was only 15, lost his case at the Hereditary Health Court, and was subjected to forced sterilization but died during the operation. Apparently, he had a previously undetected heart condition and couldn't tolerate the anesthetic. His parents are trying to get some financial compensation, even if only to pay for a decent burial, but it's not looking good for them. When I hear stories like this, I want to scream and shout and weep all at the same time, but I do what you do. I bite my tongue because shouting and crying will change nothing. All I can do is protect our twins and try to give them a decent childhood, in spite of the raids every night. And there really are good moments. One of our neighbors here has a small canoe and he regularly lets the children use it. Georg and Horst play at being forest Indians like in the Deer Slayer and spend ages paddling along the little channels here. Emilia prefers to stay in her favorite role, living and fighting like a man, which in no way lessens her enjoyment of these excursions. When the sirens go off at night, we feel really safe here because we're so far from the edge of the city and any industry, so we're not a target. Ever since Georg saw that air raid with you in the street, he looks out of the cabin windows at night to see the bombers coming, and Emilia does the same. They find it exciting to watch the anti-aircraft rockets lighting up and shooting down the enemy. Thank goodness they're still too little to be involved as flak helpers, but I sensed they'd both volunteer for it if they were old enough. When I said something about it being dangerous work, Emilia said she'd rather do something than sit here waiting for bombs to fall on her head. She sounded so like her father. Richard, she's so similar to you that I sometimes think she's the boy. Georg has the more reserved nature of a little girl. Yes, I know what you're thinking, that he couldn't possibly have inherited his reticent personality from his mother. Yes, I would also rather take action and do something, not just wait for something else to happen. But the only thing I can do, apart from looking after my children, is help the young first-time mothers whose men are all fighting at the front. It was Dorothea's idea. It's doing her good to feel like a professional nurse again because she misses talking to Fritz so much, just like I do you. I hope you soon have home leave. We're all longing to see you and love you so much. Paula. Paula's letter left Richard uneasy. Family news always filled him with joy and affection, but now he was concerned about this visit from the health worker. Immediately he suspected Kruger of having a hand in this. Nobody else would be minded to query Georg's medical certification. Paula had clearly fended off the immediate danger, but Richard feared that Kruger's desire for vengeance could drive him to hound his family long-term, all because Richard had dared to accuse him in front of the supervisory commission. He had assumed that Kruger would be satisfied with ruining his career and sending him to the front. It hadn't occurred to him that he would stop at nothing, including reporting on his young son. But then a man who could happily send the sick to their deaths was lacking in any moral scruples. As Richard turned all this over in his mind, he found himself questioning the way his military colleagues hoped for the final victory. He loved his home and his fatherland, but victory would put a regime that he deeply despised and which had become a threat to him and his family permanently into power. On the other hand, he didn't want to live through another dispiriting period like after the last war. Whichever way he looked at it, he could see he would emerge from this war a loser, regardless of how it ended. Chapter 39. You know how much I appreciate your visits, my dear Frau Helmer, but you need to be careful. Walls have ears here and eyes as well. Dr. Stamm gave a weary sigh. Our Aryan neighbors are constantly watching to see who comes here and waste no time in informing on visitors. That may be so, said Paula, but I'm not letting that frighten me away. The Nuremberg laws don't forbid Aryans from paying a call on a Jew, and it's certainly nothing more than a friendly visit, and I certainly didn't know those laws prohibited anyone from bringing a homemade cake along. With that, she placed her basket on the table and lifted out an apple cake. Oh, you shouldn't have, protested Dr. Stamm, but Paula could see how genuinely touched he was. Oh, but I had to. Our neighbors at the allotments have showered us with apples, and they've got to be put to good use, haven't they? She tried to lift his mood, but with little success. It was as if oppression and despair had infiltrated every corner of his home. Thank you so much, said Dr. Stamm. Perhaps it is a fitting farewell gift to be able to enjoy the last fruits of summer in a cake. Farewell gift? Paula was puzzled. Have you decided to leave Germany after all? We non-Aryans no longer decide anything for ourselves. No, I have not decided to do so, but in October we have to report for resettlement. Resettlement? Paula stared at him. And where are you supposed to go for resettlement? The elderly doctor shrugged. I don't know. Somewhere in the new eastern regions. We've already been given a list of what we're allowed to take with us. It's not much. 1 suitcase per person and a limited amount of cash. Paula gasped. And your flat? What will happen to your flat, your furniture and everything? Presumably some kind of enforced contribution to the German war effort or the NSDAP. Paula was lost for words. Everything in her heart cried out that this couldn't be so, that it was unjust, that this couldn't be happening in a civilized country like Germany, and yet at the same time, she knew she was deceiving herself to think this way. I've never told you why my husband's at the front, she said. He was dismissed from his post because he had uncovered something monstrous and tried to fight against it. What did he uncover? Seeing the old gentleman's weary eyes spark with interest, Paula told him of Richard's battle, everything from the forced sterilization plans to the transfer of his patients and their deliberate murder. I had always believed we were a civilized nation, Paula concluded, and I'd like to go on seeing us that way, but whatever we ourselves may believe, the present government's nothing more than a gang of murderers and sadists who attract more like them. Before Hitler came to power, Richard was a respected psychiatrist and a valued expert witness, and the man who dismissed him would never have become a leading consultant, given his negative attitude towards the sick. But he wormed his way into the senior post on the heels of a Jewish colleague who had been discharged, become a party member and Richard's superior. After Richard was dismissed, it was only with the support of his closest friend and a renowned professor of surgery that he got to be a medical officer in Africa. He'd probably otherwise have ended up as an auxiliary in a punishment battalion on the Eastern Front. She swallowed hard. Is there no chance of you avoiding this deportation, Dr. Stamm? He looked at her with his kind but tired eyes, placed his right hand comfortingly on her shoulder and said, Oh yes, there is, my dear. There is a way, and we'll do it when the time is right. Although there was sadness in his voice, he sounded so serene that Paula returned home feeling calm and comforted. 2 weeks later, she heard that Dr. Stamm had died. The exact circumstances of his death were not clear. Gossip from some of their neighbors suggested that he and his wife had killed themselves because of the threatened deportation. Others claimed the old doctor had suffered a stroke and died of a brain hemorrhage after his wife had been struck down by pneumonia. Whoever Paula asked, no one could tell her with any certainty what had happened, and her fear grew that he had taken his own life in order to escape the worst. But what was the worst? Being resettled and uprooted, or the suspicion that Jewish citizens were about to meet the same fate as the sick? The very thought sent a shudder down Paula's spine, and she wished Richard were there to listen to her fears. She didn't want to entrust her suspicions to the military postal service. All this made October 1941 the darkest month of Paula's life. Fritz came home on leave at Christmas, bringing Richard's presents for Paula and the children with him, including the promised shoes. Fritz clearly felt terrible that Richard was spending Christmas at the front and not coming back on home leave before January. We couldn't both be away at the same time. He looked embarrassed as he explained it to Paula. I wanted Richard to toss a coin for it, but he insisted I travel back to the children for Christmas. He said it was because my intervention had got him in the medical corps in the first place, and that Henrietta and Harry are much younger than Georg and Amelia. That's why he'll be here on January 4th, when I'm back at the front. Fritz, you don't need to justify anything. Richard's done the right thing, regardless of how much you've helped him. Your children are younger than ours and need their papa home at times like this. At least it was peacetime when the twins were little. But they were only 7 for the first wartime Christmas, Fritz reminded her. That was before the bombing started, and we still had a normal family life. I hope you'll all have a wonderful Christmas. I know we will too, because we're so excited about Richard coming back in January. Paula, you're marvelous, and now I have to do exactly what Richard instructed me to. He told me to give you a big hug from him. He put his arms around her. She hugged him tightly in return, enjoying the sense of security she'd had to do without for so long. And you're a wonderful friend, Fritz. The best in the world. Now you're embarrassing me again. That's the price you pay for bringing Christmas gifts, she said, smiling, then let him go. With the prospect of Richard's much-anticipated home leave, Paula and her children managed to enjoy Christmas in spite of the painful gap in their lives. Paula's father spent Christmas Eve with them, bringing gifts for the children. For Georg, there was a toy rifle, studded with silver nails like the weapon used by his favorite Apache character, Winnetou, and he was beside himself with delight. For Amelia, there was the Karl May trilogy, Satan and Iscariot. These were always my favorite, Amelia, explained her grandfather. The first book's set in America. Then, in the second one, Winnetou comes to Dresden to set off for the Middle East with his white blood brother, Old Shatterhand. Then in the third book, they're back in America. Amelia was agog. Winnetou was here, in Germany? Yes, and the Middle East too, among the Arabs. I think in the book they even go to places your father is seeing. They have lots of exciting adventures. Papa sent us a photo of real belly dancers, said Amelia. Have you ever seen anything like that? No, but now you're making me curious. And so, after the traditional Christmas Eve exchange of gifts, the little family spent the evening going through the many photos that Richard had managed to enclose in nearly every letter. Paula always marveled at how Richard's pictures managed to give the impression of a research trip and not a tour of duty. As well as the belly dancers, there were landscapes with palm trees, sunsets, locals in exotic robes, and even one of a Bedouin with his camels. Well, it wouldn't surprise me if your papa sent us a photo of Haji Halef Omar's grandchildren. You remember all those adventures in the Middle East that I've told you from Karl May's other books, about the faithful Muslim and his friend, the German explorer Kara Ben Nimsi? Said Paula's father with a smile when Georg excitedly showed him the one with the camels. Then he said to his daughter, He could have done far worse, you know. From what my patients tell me about the Eastern Front, it's appalling, and has little or nothing to do with all that propaganda in the weekly newsreels. Paula nodded. Yes, you're right, and I'm so grateful to Fritz for getting Richard into his battalion. The 4th of January 1942 fell on a Sunday. The thaw had started, the sky was gray, and it looked like rain. For the first time in months, Paula and the children collected their car from her father-in-law's garage and set off to meet Richard at the railway station. Men in uniform were everywhere, some saying goodbye to their families, others being joyfully welcomed home. Paula spotted only 3 men wearing civvies, and they were a ripe old age. It also struck her that hardly any of the train and platform staff were men. Women were clearly in the majority among the civilian population that thronged the station and staffed the railway. She couldn't help but think back to the late 1920s and how tough it had been for her to secure any professional post, all because she was a married woman. She'd even heard how other married women, whether childless or with older families, had been encouraged by the National Socialist Women's League to take up their previous professions once more, or had been drafted into semi-skilled work previously done by men. Paula saw this not as liberation, but as a slap in the face. Women were nothing more than the silent reserve. While the men were at war, they were being trusted to keep the country going, but once it was over, they would be squeezed back into subservient roles and ousted from any positions of responsibility. She thought of Leonie. This attitude was precisely what Leonie had been so critical of and had actually stopped her from wanting to marry. Since the war had started, their exchange of letters had dwindled. Post from abroad was viewed with suspicion, even if posted in neutral Switzerland. At least Leonie had got out at the right time and escaped the horror. Paula didn't like to think what might have happened to her friend if she hadn't emigrated in 1936. Now she had a good job as a pediatrician in a hospital in Bern, while her father was in general practice with a Swiss colleague. They had a good living and could sleep at night, safe in the knowledge that their peace wouldn't be shattered by air raids. The barely intelligible public address system announced the arrival of Richard's train on Platform 8. "That's Papa's train," Emilia signed to Georg, who was already hopping from one foot to the other in his excitement. Puffing and steaming, the train pulled alongside the huge concourse, its brakes screeching so loudly that Emilia covered her ears, while Georg couldn't take his eyes off the engine. When the train stopped, what seemed to be hundreds of men in gray uniform poured out of the carriages and flooded onto the platform. Paula wondered how she would ever find Richard in this mass of uniforms, while Emilia clambered up on a bench for a better view. "Emilia, don't put your mucky shoes on the bench. The next person to sit there will get filthy." Emilia promptly shifted to the arm, trying to keep her balance as her eyes took in the whole platform while she shouted, "Papa, Papa, we're here!" A lot of men turned in her direction thinking they were being called, but quickly saw it wasn't for them. The platform gradually emptied and Emilia was still shouting out. "Emilia, get down now," said Paula. "But where's Papa?" Knowing him, he decided to let everyone get off first, so as not to have to push his way through the crowds. And there were indeed still some men disembarking, mostly officers from the rear coaches. Paula took a closer look. "There he is, at the front of that group," she called out. Then she shouted even more loudly than Emilia, "Richard, we're here!" Emilia joined in, waving furiously. "Papa, here we are!" The combination of both voices must have carried over the background noise, and Richard turned towards them, saw his family, and broke into a run. Paula and the twins did the same. Emilia and Georg reached him first. Richard let go of his case and wrapped his arms right around the twins. "Look how you've both grown. It's been such a long time." Then he turned to Paula and held her close. "I've missed you so much," he whispered, then kissed her with all the passion he'd stored up over their 10-month separation, blissfully disregarding their surroundings. Paula felt so happy in his love, in his firm embrace, in the feeling that she could let herself go and not bear the burden of responsibility alone, even if only for 7 days. 7 days, 1 week after 10 months apart. She was grateful for every single minute. When they eventually let go of one another, she took a closer look at him. Had he changed? His eyes still had that old gleam, the one that signaled the unshakable optimism that had carried him through so many tough times. She linked her arm through his, and slowly they walked to the car. "Would you like to drive?" asked Paula. "Oh no, I'll enjoy being chauffeured by you," he said, putting his case in the boot and holding the door open for the children to clamber aboard. Then he took his seat beside her in the front. Only then did he take off his cap. "Graying at the temples, eh?" she commented, giving him a sidelong glance. "That's right." He ran his hand over his hair. "Shall I get the boot polish to it?" he said with a grin. "Don't you dare. I love you just as you are. Don't change a thing, and anyway, you'd ruin the pillowcases." Emilia giggled from the back, and Paula saw in the rearview mirror how she was signing the conversation for Georg. "Or we could just get black bed linen," came Richard's retort. "Hey, maybe we should try that. Get away from the old hospital white." "Black bed linen? Is there such a thing?" "Oh yes, very popular in certain circles. There are even sheets of red silk, only hearsay, of course. Never been in such establishments myself." "I didn't think so. Otherwise you'd have sent us photos," said Paula. Richard burst out laughing, and Paula joined in. The children laughed with them, innocently unaware of all the deliberate ambiguities. Richard's parents and his sister had prepared an enormous spread to welcome him back, particularly as Carl also had home leave and had come back from France just 1 day before Richard. "I've been really lucky," his nephew told him. "I made myself indispensable to the occupying troops at the right time and so didn't get sent off to the Eastern Front. It's really not a bad life in France." "So you're in charge, are you?" Richard loved teasing his nephew. "Not exactly. I've ended up in military admin. Nice little desk job. Got a friend to thank for that," Carl said with a grin. "I got him out of a real mess and he did me a favor in return." "A real mess? Sounds like a good story there." Richard was eager for more. "It's more for men's ears." Carl glanced at the children and shot Richard a conspiratorial look. "And how's life in Africa?" Richard's father cut in to change the subject. "The newsreel only tells us about all the victories for the Africa Corps. Sounds like a lot of heroic yarns to me." "To be honest, I don't play a part in any heroic deeds," replied Richard. "We've been working pretty comfortably in the main military hospital in Tripoli, but I think that could change this year. There's a push towards Tobruk, and that'd put Tripoli not far from the front line. I'll be fine as long as we carry on being deployed where we are, and I just hope I'll be spared the field hospital." "How's it different? The main one from the field hospital?" asked Margit. "In the main military hospital, you're miles away from the fighting and work in relative safety. It's more like a normal hospital with various specialist departments. The other kind of hospital, the field unit, is located out of enemy reach but is mostly busy with emergency surgery and the badly wounded, with a view either to getting them back to operational fitness as soon as possible or sending them on to the main military hospital for further recovery. It's really hard work." "When Fritz was on home leave, we had a surgeon in from the field hospital to cover for him. I haven't got enough surgical experience to fully deputize for him, you see. If the operation's not complicated, I can do it, but Fritz is a real wizard when it comes to finding solutions in complicated cases. He's developed 2 new surgical methods and has passed these on to Professor Wehmeyer for the next research paper. I reckon Fritz will be heading for a professorship himself after the war." Richard smiled gently. "But I digress," he went on. "The stand-in surgeon from the field hospital said working with us was like a holiday, with everything done according to a timetable, and Tripoli being such a pleasant place. There are hardly any air attacks, and if there are, well, it's all dealt with through aerial combat. The Brits fly over, our people take off to meet them, and then it's fighter pilot against fighter pilot." "That'll be like Hans-Joachim Marseille, then," butted in Carl. "All the newsreels are full of him as the big hero. Have you come across him?" "No, we have virtually no contact at all with fighter pilots. They live in their own world, and any fighter pilot who doesn't get out in time when he's shot at, well, he doesn't come to us in the hospital. He ends up in the hero's graveyard." An awkward silence fell around the table. "Don't let's deceive ourselves," said Richard. "No matter what the weekly propaganda tells you, men are fighting and dying at the front. Daring deeds come at a price. I'm very glad I'm only in the 3rd row and have never had to act the hero." "Don't do yourself down, Richard," said Paula. "It was your heroic work that got you sent to the front in the first place." "My failure, you mean, surely?" The bitterness in his voice took her breath away. "You didn't fail." "I did, because I took it too far. I wanted to save everyone and in the end saved no one." "That's not true, Richard," piped up Margit. "Just think of Manfred and Rolf, the twins here, or Johannes Mörneke. You saved all of them. Johannes has turned out so well. He's living with his family again and comes here to work just like any of our other journeymen. Okay, he's not quite as productive as someone who's fully fit, but it's amazing how being included here at the joinery has helped him get back a sense of normality. And his wife is so happy about everything." Richard didn't say anything, although it was clear how Margit's words had moved him. Once Richard and Paula were back in their own flat that evening, he showed the children how to develop a film and let them enjoy seeing how the images slowly came to life in their makeshift darkroom. And so, in their own bathroom, they saw photos of the crossing from Africa back to Italy. Brilliant blue skies and an enemy destroyer on the horizon at a safe distance. The Italian coast, the main station at Rome where they had changed trains, and then some landscapes he'd taken from the moving train. Eventually, he got the children to bed and sat with them until they fell asleep, while Paula sorted out which of his clothes needed to be taken for laundering by their daily help the next day. She'd just finished the job when Richard came out of the children's bedroom. "Are they asleep?" she asked him. "Like little dormice," he said, pulling her towards him. "I hope we don't hear the sirens tonight. I've wanted you for so long." "And me you," she said, smiling at him. "We've got some catching up to do." He swept her off her feet suddenly, like a bride being carried across the threshold. "Then let's get started before some idiotic Tommy interrupts us with his bombs." Chapter 40. Richard's home leave was over much too fast. When Paula drove him back to the railway station with the children the following Sunday, she wondered where the time had gone. "I hope it won't be so long this time before we're together again," she whispered to him. "I don't know how I'm going to stand it without you. Remember, we're not alone. You've got the whole family around you, and I've got Fritz, at least." Before she had a chance to reply, he drew her close and embraced her with the same passion as when he first came home. "Take good care of yourself and the children." Then he hugged Georg and Emilia and got on the train. The twins stood on the platform waving until the train was out of sight. "Mama, do you think we're going to win the war this year and then Papa can come home again?" asked Emilia. "I don't know." It struck Paula for the first time how everyone around her, including the children, constantly spoke of victory. They would win the war and then it would be over. Even if they were right, what would happen then? Her mind went back to the conversations she and Richard had had in the privacy of their bedroom, undisturbed, with no one to overhear them. "However the war ends, we'll be the losers," he'd said. "If we win, just think how that would strengthen Hitler. He'd be so powerful he'd be out of control. And I don't know how I'd keep silent about the injustices going on here, and if we lose, well, it'll be even worse than the last time." "What makes you think that?" "Because this time the war's raging all around us here at home," he explained. "Every single bomb that hits our city and kills innocent civilians stirs up more hatred and makes people even more defiant. The desire for vengeance and retribution will drive even youngsters to man the flak guns. You only have to listen to Emilia. Looking at it from where she stands, she's quite right. She needs to feel angry so she can take action and not be suffocated by the fear, and the whole population needs that too. The war fires everyone up, and the worse it gets, the worse the mutual hatred, and the end can only come when the enemy is wiped out, and that's either them or us." The bitterness in Richard's voice shocked her. "Richard, tell me what you really saw at the front." "Nothing worse than I've seen here. In fact, I think the children have something even worse to struggle with, and that's the loss of faith in having any safety in bed at night. Emilia and Georg have faith in our flak guns." "Yes, that's true, but only until the first house in our road is destroyed, and with it the myth of our all-conquering army that protects us from every evil." He took a deep breath. "And there's nothing, absolutely nothing we can do about it. Whatever the outcome, we lose. I've often wondered what would happen to me if my falsified registration forms had been found in a different era, with no war going on, with no front for an insubordinate doctor to be sent to. Maybe I'd have ended up like Alfred Scheer. I don't know how I'll live with the injustice if the Nazis achieve their final victory and Hitler's ideology reigns everywhere, and I'm fearful that we won't be able to protect Georg forever." "We'll always protect our children, Richard. We'll find ways no matter what happens." She snuggled in close, sensing how her presence gave him some reassurance. After Richard's departure, Paula felt empty. It was even worse than after the first time because she now knew the difference between the reports in his letters where he tried to paint a positive picture for her and the children, and his real thinking. Yes, he was still intrinsically optimistic, but his confidence had taken a severe beating, and she feared that being apart from his family again could cause him to lose it completely. With the arrival of May, the days grew warmer, and so Paula spent weekends and school holidays at her parents-in-law's allotment garden. The children loved the simple, natural life there, but what Paula treasured even more was their relative safety from the air raids. At the end of May came the traditional Whitsun holiday, and they spent it outdoors with their neighbors. There were barbecues, and Georg and his friend Horst enjoyed bathing in the little tributary of the Elbe, while Emilia told them they were crazy to swim in such cold water. Red Indians know no pain, announced Horst, and it's not surprising that Kolma Pushy stays away from the water, 'cause if she put on a swimsuit, everyone would know she isn't really a man at all. And she's a chilly mortal anyway, said Georg, his words beautifully clear. Whenever he was with Horst, he made huge efforts with his enunciation, and his friend always made sure Georg could see his lips. He'd also learned some of the gestures that Georg recognized so well. What on earth's a chilly mortal? Asked Amelia. It's what Uncle Eric always says, retorted Horst. It's what you are. The water's fine. No, it isn't, silly. I bet you'll both have colds tomorrow. Oh, no, we won't, Horst shot back. We're tough nuts. We can put up with anything. That night, Georg said he had a sore throat. Told you, said Amelia. Winnetou isn't such a tough nut after all, and I'm sure old Shatterhand has got it too. By morning, Georg had a high temperature. Paula was horrified when she looked inside his mouth at his throat. The white coating was an unmistakable sign of diphtheria. Amelia had no symptoms at all. You've spent the last few days with Horst, haven't you? Georg nodded. Then I must go and see him. Paula pulled on her cardigan and went off to knock at Horst's grandmother's cabin on her allotment. Good morning. I've just come to ask how Horst is today. The boy caught a terrible cold somewhere yesterday, a bad sore throat, too. I've made him some chamomile tea. Is Georg sick, too? Paula came straight to the point. Yes, but this is no ordinary cold. It looks like diphtheria. Horst's grandma was puzzled. But they all had their inoculation. It can't be. I'd still like to examine him. Inoculation doesn't always give full protection. Horst was as poorly as Georg. One look inside his throat confirmed her suspicions. It's diphtheria, Paula said to his grandmother. We must take both of them to the children's hospital at Rotenbergsort right away. So Georg and Horst didn't get to spend those early summer days in their paradise at the allotments, but on Paula's old ward at the children's hospital. She felt a trace of wistfulness for her old life when she arrived, but was anxious for the lads, too. Although she knew the illness would be a little less severe due to the boys' previous inoculations, she was painfully aware that a period of unpleasant treatment and a mass of injections lay ahead for them both. At least you're not on your own here, she said as she prepared to leave them. You two friends will see it through together, I know. Like Papa and Uncle Fritz in Africa, Georg replied, taking the greatest of care how he enunciated every word. Paula had drummed it into him that at the hospital he was to use spoken language only. Georg had no idea why this mattered so much, but he'd made a promise to his mother and Paula was sure he'd do it for Horst's sake, too. As Paula left the ward, she caught Horst saying to Georg, We'll escape before anyone ties us to the stake. And she couldn't help but smile in spite of the gravity of their condition. She felt sorry for Amelia as the boys were her best and only playmates. She wondered if this might change in August when the twins would turn 10. This meant the two boys would have to join the Hitler Youth Junior Wing and Amelia the League of German Girls. Richard loathed the Hitler Youth, as did Paula, but membership of both was compulsory, and there was no way of avoiding it. Paula hoped that at least the company of other girls for once would be good for Amelia, and that she'd have fun at the outdoor camps and make friends. It was Georg she was worried about. The deaf and dumb were routinely excluded from the Hitler Youth, and it was doubtful whether Georg would be accepted as hard of hearing and not deaf. What would happen if someone uncovered his secret? Paula composed herself. They weren't there yet. What mattered now was to get both boys better. During the week following Whitsun, the sirens went almost every night. Paula and Amelia would hurry down to the cellar, but their thoughts were always with Georg and Horst. The seriously ill and infectious couldn't ever be taken down to the hospital air raid shelter. She hoped the boys would help one another through it. Fortunately, another letter from Richard had recently arrived to divert her mind from these worries. My dearest Paula, I don't know when this will reach you, but we've now left Tripoli and are in a field hospital outside Tobruk. The work here is so different from the civilized, leisurely existence we had in Tripoli. but we're still a good way from the front. As ever, Fritz is our best surgeon, and for the first time, I don't feel like a useless hanger-on because we've got a lot of distressed and traumatized men here. Up to now, they've been on the receiving end of the tough old, cruel-to-be-kind approach that's supposed to get them back on duty. It took me a while to persuade people to let me do things my way, but when they actually saw it working, I got my own allocated area, and am now responsible for getting our men back to strength mentally. Calming people who are utterly terrified and lashing out in all directions is no easy matter. In many cases, only an intravenous dose of Evipan works. I hit on the idea when I was dealing with a man we just couldn't bring under control, and we were afraid he would beat some of us to a pulp. I thought that whatever helps administer an anesthetic effect must surely help here, too. The result was astounding. He fell asleep right away, and when he woke up, his nerves had settled completely. It was as if he'd woken from a nightmare with a bad head and now felt ashamed of his previous behavior. This worked the same way a second time. Since then, I've used varying doses of Evipan, depending on how badly the patient is suffering. I know this can't be a long-term treatment because there's a risk of addiction, as with morphine, but when it comes to breaking the vicious cycle of panic, anxiety, panic, and making the patient somehow receptive again, this is ideal. I have even observed how a lower dosage can facilitate the use of suggestion to restore the inner equilibrium. I'd never have thought I could make myself more useful as a psychiatrist at the front than at the main military hospital. I haven't yet seen any cases of shell shock here, and that's probably because we're not forced to crawl through the trenches in constant fear of gas attacks and being buried alive. No, the dangers here go by the name of bombs, grenades, tanks, and gunfire. And then, of course, there's the constant worry about our loved ones at home, where we can't protect them. Don't be concerned about me. Nobody attacks a field hospital. As soon as we're in Tobruk, I'll send you photos. With my love, Richard. Nobody attacks a field hospital. How dearly Paula wanted to believe that, and that nobody would bomb a children's hospital either. But 3 days after Richard's letter came, her worst fears were realized. This time, the aircraft struck by daylight and specifically bombarded residential areas. 3 homes went up in flames only 1 street away, but far worse for Paolo was the gigantic column of fire rising from the direction of the children's hospital. The news spread in no time. The hospital had received a direct hit. Fear gripped Paula. As soon as the all-clear sounded, she told Emilia to hurry to Aunt Margit's house, while she herself got out her bike and set off for the children's hospital. The fire brigade was already there. Apart from the fire itself, she saw little damage. "Where are the children?" she cried. "My son's here." "Ask over there," replied the fireman, pointing towards the hospital gardens, where a group of nurses tried to calm anxious parents. "Frau Dr. Helmer." Paula turned toward the voice. "Sister Elfriede? You'll be here for Georg. Nothing to worry about. They're all safe. After the first attack, we evacuated all the children to a number of shelters. There were a couple of minor injuries from flying glass. The children's hospital has taken over some of the old pavilions at Langenhorn Asylum, so we're moving the children there." At first, she felt only relief that the children were safe, but then Paula registered fully what Sister Elfriede had said. "Langenhorn? Under Dr. Kruger?" "Yes, but the treatment will be as it is here. Some of our staff are being allocated to Langenhorn while the hospital is repaired." "Are you going too?" Sister Elfriede nodded. "Then please keep an eye on Georg. My husband and Dr. Kruger clashed over a number of matters, and I'm afraid that could interfere with Georg's treatment. I'm sure Dr. Kruger doesn't have time to wage a vendetta against an innocent child. I pray you're right, but please take great care of him in any case. If anything strikes you as odd, please phone me immediately." "Of course." Sister Elfriede took a notebook and pencil from her uniform pocket to write down Paula's number. "Do you know where Georg and Horst are now?" "They're probably already on the way to Langenhorn. You can visit tomorrow afternoon." "Thank you, Sister Elfriede." Georg and Horst had got through the bombardment without physical injuries, even though the glass wall separating the beds from the office had shattered into 1,000 pieces. depositing fragments all over the bedspreads. Not so lucky was Dieter, the 5-year-old in the bed next to Horst. He hadn't noticed the cuts to his face and burst into tears as soon as Horst pointed them out. Perhaps the worst thing had been the nurses' obvious panic as they frantically pulled the children from their beds and hurried them in nightclothes and slippers to shelters nearby when, as a rule, they were not allowed even to get out of bed. During air raids, they normally stayed put, secure in the knowledge that the flak rockets would protect them and that hospitals were never attacked. "I'd never have thought our flak would let all this through," said Horst to Georg as they waited it out in the air raid shelter. "Must have been too many planes," Georg reasoned. "They just couldn't hit everything." "Blasted Tommies," cursed Horst. "Now they're bombing hospitals, and that's not allowed. It's forbidden, my grandma told me." "I want to shoot them all down," said Georg. "But we can't be flak auxiliaries till we're 14. The war'll be over by then." At Langenhorn they had adjacent beds like before. "Didn't your papa used to treat the lunatics here?" asked Horst. Georg nodded. "And do you think there are still lunatics here?" Georg shrugged. "Shall we go and find some?" suggested Horst. "I've never seen a real lunatic before, have you?" "No, and we're supposed to stay in bed," said Georg firmly. "Hey, come on. Let's see if we can find the lunatics." Horst got out of bed, gingerly at first, and peeped through the door of the observation room. "The coast is clear. Nobody there. Come on." Georg's weakened state made him hesitate at first, but he didn't want to be left behind, so he followed Horst. The door leading to the garden was open, but nobody was outside. "No lunatics here at all," he said. "Maybe they've been sent to the front as well," Horst wondered. "Lunatics can't be soldiers," retorted Georg. "So why's your father at the front if there are no lunatics there? He does operations there, and if anyone new goes mad, then he does the treatment." "And do many go mad there?" "Don't know." "What are you two doing here?" A nurse had spotted them in the garden. "You're supposed to stay in bed until you're better." We were looking for the toilet," fibbed Horst. "You're not allowed to get up yet at all, and if you must go, young man, you ring the bell if you don't mind." "Yes, but I can't always do it in the bedpan. I wanted a proper toilet." "And you thought you'd find one in the garden?" "We went the wrong way," said Horst. "It's quite confusing here, and anyway, we thought there were lunatics here." "Lunatics?" "Yes, there always used to be. His father gave them treatment because he's a mad doctor." Horst gestured towards Georg. "Something wrong, Nurse Suzanne?" A tall man in a white coat came towards them. "I think these two wanted to see some lunatics." "Lunatics?" The doctor raised his eyebrows in surprise. "You wanted to see real lunatics." He gave Horst a hard look, then Georg. "Will you show us some?" asked Horst. "There are no lunatics here, just two naughty boys." "Dr. Kruger, what shall I do with the pair of them?" asked the nurse. "Send them to bed." But Horst didn't let it drop. "Georg's papa used to look after the lunatics here." "Georg?" Kruger repeated the name, then stared at Georg once more. "Tell me, boy, is your full name Georg Helmer?" Georg had no difficulty lip-reading the doctor's words and was aware of something malicious in the man's eyes, something he didn't like. "Yes?" "Take this one back to his bed, nurse. I'm going to have a little chat with Georg." Chapter 41. Georg felt very unsure as he followed Dr. Kruger into the examination room of the ward. There was a couch, a weighing machine, a white medicine cupboard, which reminded Georg of the kitchen cupboard at home, except that was oak, a writing desk and 2 chairs. Not one single picture decorated the sterile white walls, not even one of Hitler. The only wall decoration was a height scale for measuring the patients. His father had never told him much about his work, and unlike Amelia, he had never been able to listen in on any of his parents' conversations, but he remembered all too well his mother's concern as she repeatedly impressed upon him that he was never to tell anyone that he was completely deaf. Why this was such a problem he really didn't know, as he had never felt in any way rejected for his deafness. Yet this Dr. Kruger scared him in a way he couldn't explain. The doctor sat down at his desk and gestured at the chair in front of it. "So, you're Dr. Helmer's son," said Kruger. Georg was glad the man was facing him, as this meant he could lip-read without any trouble. It was bad when people turned away without realizing but carried on talking. "Yes," said Georg, concentrating on the best possible enunciation. "Where's your father now?" "In Africa." "The Africa Corps. Interesting. He's been lucky there, too." There was that nasty smile again. "You speak astonishingly well." Georg said nothing. "For a child born deaf." Georg still said nothing. An icy chill ran down his spine. "Your father used to try and tell me you were only hard of hearing." "I am hard of hearing," confirmed Georg. "That's why I need to see people's lips." "You have a twin sister, is that so?" "Yes." "Can she hear normally?" "Yes." Kruger folded his hands and rested his chin on them, partly covering his lips. "Definitely deaf. Liar." Georg made out these 3 words. Kruger lowered his hands. "Nothing to say?" "I didn't fully understand you then," retorted Georg. "I didn't see your lips. I heard only the words definitely, deaf, and liar." "You're a remarkable boy, Georg. As gifted a liar as your father. I intend to examine you more thoroughly over the next few days. This seems to me to be a very interesting case of hereditary deafness." "How can anyone inherit deafness?" asked Georg, looking puzzled. "You only inherit things from dead people. When someone deaf dies, they can't leave it to anyone, and I've never inherited anything from anyone." For a moment or two, Kruger seemed nonplussed. "You're very quick-witted for a 9-year-old, just like your father, which is not necessarily a good thing." He stood up. "I'll take you back to the observation room." "What on earth did he want with you?" asked Horst as soon as his friend came back. "He asked me about my father and kept wanting me to say I was deaf. But Mama told me nobody here is to know that, so I told him I'm just hard of hearing." "I won't say anything," promised Horst. "There's something strange about that doctor." "Yes, very strange. I don't think he likes my father, and so he doesn't like me either. He said he wanted to examine me some more." "That sounds uncomfortable." "Yes," said Georg, fighting back the fear. The next day, Paula came to visit her son and heard about his encounter with Kruger. Georg's fear was apparent, and her own anxiety became almost overwhelming. She tried not to let him see she felt the same, however, and promised that nothing would happen to him. "I'll talk to the doctor. He's an old colleague of your father's. He'll listen to me, and there'll be no unnecessary examinations, I promise," she said, although she wasn't sure how far she could really keep that promise. After she'd spent as long as possible with Georg, she sought out Kruger's office. His secretary tried in vain to keep her out. She was no match for an anxious mother. Dr. Kruger took it all very calmly. "Frau Dr. Helmer, I'm delighted to meet you." His courtesy was exaggerated. "Please do have a seat. What did you want to discuss with me?" Paula accepted the seat offered and sat down on the other side of his desk. "My son has told me you're planning to examine him further. As his mother, I'd like to know what this is about." "It's about treating his condition. The diphtheria is already receiving suitable treatment. I know what I'm saying here, as I worked as a doctor on the infection ward of the Children's Hospital for a whole year." "Yes, I know, Frau Dr. Helmer." "Oh yes, I forgot. My husband told me how much pleasure you take in finding out about your colleagues' private lives." Paula couldn't conceal her bitterness. Kruger noticed the anger in her voice. "Do you really think that's the right way to speak to me, Frau Dr. Helmer? After all, you want something from me, don't you?" "You're right," conceded Paula. "I want to appeal to you as a professional. I know that you and my husband had serious differences, but Georg is an innocent child. He doesn't deserve to be drawn into this conflict." She paused for breath. "Besides, doesn't it give you enough satisfaction to know that my husband has been at the front for the last 15 months, and in that whole time has spent only 7 days with his family?" Kruger smiled at her in the most arrogant way. "Is that so?" he said. Your husband can consider himself lucky that we wanted to avoid any scandal and did nothing more than discharge him. He can cause less havoc at the front than here. He only ever wanted to help people. He was guilty of deliberate insubordination and went against express instructions. There is no excuse for willful falsification of an expert's statement. Paula managed to swallow her rebuke on the tip of her tongue. She knew that if she annoyed Kruger any further, there could be fatal consequences, and not only for Georg. "My husband bears the consequences of what he did," she said, "and that's for him alone to bear, Herr Dr. Kruger. Don't drag my son into your conflict with my husband." "Don't worry, Frau Dr. Helmer." There was that superior smile again. "I'm only doing my duty, and that includes comprehensive examination and treatment of all my patients. To all appearances, your son is deaf, although he speaks remarkably well for a child born deaf." "My son was not born deaf. His hearing ability was severely impaired by a complication during the birth." Paula was vehement. "If your son really is only hard of hearing, then there may be ways in which his hearing ability can be improved. But if he is deaf, then it is our duty to report it in accordance with regulations. I'm sure you know that in cases of hereditary deafness, we must take appropriate action. His twin sister is perfectly healthy. He does not present any hereditary disease. We have documents which provide evidence of the difficult circumstances of his birth. He was born after his sister and had first to be turned in the womb and then delivered by forceps. I had an 18-hour labor." "Oh, but Frau Dr. Helmer, we both know forceps delivery can't cause hearing loss." "His twin sister has perfectly normal hearing," repeated Paula. "It is out of the question that this is a hereditary condition." "Well, perhaps it is a hereditary condition that only female relatives carry without developing it themselves. Have you any brothers or sisters, Frau Dr. Helmer?" "I don't know what that has to do with you." "If you have no healthy male siblings, it is perfectly possible that deafness has been passed on undiscovered for generations by the women in your family, and has now manifested itself for the first time in your son. All of this is worth looking into. It is possible that your daughter will also be subject to the law for the prevention of progeny with hereditary diseases." "You can't be serious," cried out Paula. "I'm perfectly serious, Frau Dr. Helmer." His face was cold and without expression. "I serve Germany and the German people, something your husband will probably never understand." "My husband is serving Germany out there where he's needed. He saves lives no matter where he is. How many lives have you saved, Herr Dr. Kruger? By rooting out and destroying hereditary disease, we are saving the entire racial corpus of the people. And now you will have to excuse me as I still have a lot to do. If your son's documentation fits with the truth, you will have nothing to fear. However, if my suspicion is confirmed and hereditary deafness is diagnosed, then the health police will be dealing with your daughter as well." He got to his feet. "I wish you a pleasant day, Frau Dr. Helmer." Chapter 42. The conversation with Kruger left Paula stunned. In her desperation, she decided not to go straight home, but to call on her father for help and advice. Frau Koch opened the door to her. Her own flat had been bombed a few weeks earlier, so Dr. Engelhardt was now letting out Paula's old room to her. "What on earth happened? Come in, Frau Helmer. You look quite devastated." "Well, yes, something devastating has happened, all right." "Richard? No, don't worry, nobody's died," Paula quickly said to reassure her, then went to find her father in their front room to tell him everything. Dr. Engelhardt was visibly shaken. He thought hard for a few moments before speaking. "Would it help if I confirmed to him that your mother's brother had normal hearing? There was no hereditary deafness on your mother's side." "I know that, Papa. I fear that you can confirm as much as you want, but Kruger won't accept it. And because Uncle Bruno fell in the last war, Kruger will say you're biased. He'll have as little faith in what you say as he did in anything Richard said." A tear rolled down her cheek. "I don't know what to do, Papa. It's so obvious that Kruger wants to take his revenge on Richard through our children, but I can't just take Georg out of hospital in his condition. Yes, I could treat him at home, but Kruger would have the Gesundheitspolizei on my back because Georg is still infectious. Unless he can be discharged in the usual way. But he's only been in hospital for 3 weeks. We both know that with this kind of infection, it's 4 weeks of strict bed rest. He's still on antitoxin, and only people with up-to-date inoculations are allowed on the infection ward. No doctor in his right mind would discharge him early. So we've got to ride it out for a week. Yes, a whole week at the mercy of that brute. A week when it would be so easy for Kruger to see through our hard-of-hearing story. And who knows whether even then he'll let Georg come home. He might put him straight on the sterilization list. Nothing can happen that quickly, Paula. He has to get parental consent, and you can find ways of stalling. Even if it comes to anything more, carrying out a sterilization procedure on a child who has only just recovered from diphtheria would carry a significant risk. On top of that, Paula, he's only 9. You could play for time by giving official agreement, but only when he's 14. That's assuming a rational conversation with Kruger. With him, it's not about applying the law, but maliciously getting his own back on Richard. This is a man who has sent dozens of sick people to their deaths. If anything gets in his way, he'll simply quote the section of the law that says the head of an institution makes the decisions regarding sterilizations. Now the tears really flowed. Her father put his arms around her and held her close. They didn't speak, and Paula's tears soon soaked the front of her father's shirt. Perhaps he needs some other problems to take his mind off Georg, said her father eventually, breaking the silence. Paula raised her head. What do you mean, Papa? Hard times can drive any of us to a few dirty tricks. You know how Kruger denounced Richard to the Gestapo. I'll never, ever forget that. I was so frightened for Richard. Now we need to think something up, some malicious accusation, and then report him to the Gestapo anonymously. By the time he gets all that sorted out, Georg will be back home, safely discharged. Papa, that's evil, underhand, and unlike me, he said, smiling at her. No, I wanted to say that's ingenious, she laughed, but it is, of course, also evil, underhand, and unlike you in normal circumstances. So we're agreed. All we need now is some credible accusation that'll get Kruger into real trouble. That's tricky. He's such a pillar of the party. That doesn't mean anything. We could hang something on him about homosexual activity, along the lines of what happened to Ernst Röhm. That's enough to ruin any Nazi. Papa, I admire your imaginative powers, but isn't that a teeny bit far-fetched? Why do you say that? Is he married? No idea, admitted Paula. I must confess I don't know anything about his private life. That makes it more difficult. They both thought hard. Paula had an idea. How about the black market? We could say he's secretly selling hospital supplies on the black market, and so hospital medicines are falling into the hands of enemies of the state. That would keep him tied up for a week while they check stocks of all the medical supplies, unless someone's already been helping themselves, of course. Have you still got someone there you could trust to relocate something so that it takes a while to find? No, but we don't really need all that. Just a whiff of scandal like that around him will give him a bad week. Good. So tomorrow I'll deliver an anonymous report on him to the Gestapo. Meanwhile, you can visit Georg every day and make sure he's discharged as soon as he's allowed. Visits to the children's ward were normally only permitted on Wednesdays and Sundays, but because Paula had worked on the infection ward and still knew a few of the staff, she was allowed to see Georg outside visiting hours. She brought a tiny bag of toffees for him and Horst, but advised them to hide the sweets from the nurses. Then she explained to Georg that he must continue to try and conceal his deafness from Kruger. If he wants to examine you, Georg, you must cry and tell him you've got a sore throat and a bad headache, she told him. Don't cooperate with him. Just whine and grizzle as much as you can. For a sick child, that's not a strange thing to do. Be quietly naughty. That's allowed. Can I be naughty as well? Asked Horst. Yes, but don't take it too far. Just do it enough to stop Kruger doing anything straight away, so that he has to leave it all for the time being. He mustn't see that it's pretend. That's very important. Mama, what'll happen if he realizes I'm deaf? Paula hesitated. How was she going to explain the law for the prevention of progeny with hereditary diseases to a 9-year-old? Dr. Kruger believes that people who can't hear will have children who can't hear either, and he wants to wipe out deafness. He would carry out an operation to stop you ever being a father. But Fräulein Felber's mother is deaf, and Fräulein Felber can hear perfectly. Exactly, and Dr. Kruger is an idiot, but that doesn't stop him having the power to do these things and to push through his horrible opinions. And this is not only to do with you. He will make out that Amelia would pass on deafness to her children. But Amelia can hear perfectly too. As I said, Dr. Kruger is an idiot, but a dangerous, scary idiot, Paula said with a sigh. A real villain, said Horst. Yes, a real villain, and a powerful villain at that. But you two can outfox him if you're really cunning and clever. Do everything to stop him being able to examine Georg. You only need to prevent it for 1 week, and then everything will be all right. After his mother had gone, Georg spent a long time thinking about what she had said. He'd never thought about having his own children once he was a grown-up, and he certainly hadn't thought about whether they'd be able to hear or not. His deafness had never really been so important. Of course, it was often hard not to hear everything that was going on, but it had some advantages, too, like not hearing all the air raids that Amelia and Horst had to endure. Why couldn't this stupid doctor leave him in peace? Kruger didn't make an appearance until the ward round on the following day, when, one by one, he had a look at every child, a gaggle of nurses and young medics trailing in his wake. He didn't spend long on Horst, but when he came to Georg's bed, he pulled up a chair and sat down. "How are you?" he asked Georg, looking him straight in the eye. "I've got a sore throat and a headache," replied Georg, mindful of his mother's warning, "and I feel sick." "So, you're feeling sick. Are you going to vomit?" "No." "Good. I've brought you something." From the pocket of his white coat he took a small bell. "I'd like to establish how severely hard of hearing you are. Sister Elfrida will ring the bell behind your back, and you must tell me when you hear it." "I feel sick," said Georg again. "I've got a headache." "Sister Elfrida, you can start." "I feel so sick," groaned Georg. "Pull yourself together. Tell me when you hear the bell." Georg noticed how Horst leaned forward very slightly, a barely perceptible wink. "It rang," he said. "Do your worst," he thought to himself. Kruger registered surprise. "Correct." "I feel so sick. Can't we stop now?" "No, again." Just then Georg noticed Horst sticking his finger down his throat and vomiting copiously all over Kruger's back. "Ah!" roared Kruger, shooting out of his chair. "Why didn't you ask for the bowl?" He stripped off his soiled white coat and let it drop to the floor. "I feel so sick, too," groaned Horst. The sight of the vomit combined with its smell made Georg's own tummy rebel. Almost immediately he vomited all over his bed. Kruger was almost beside himself now. "Sister Elfrida, clear up this mess, and I need a fresh coat." He left the room. Georg noticed the ghost of a smile flit across Sister Elfrida's face as she stripped off his bedding and took it to the laundry bin. "That was really disgusting," said Georg. "Yes, I had to force it," admitted Horst, "but hard times serve to make us stronger, is what my grandma always says." He rummaged inside the drawer of his bedside chest for the toffees they'd stowed away and fished out too. "To take away the vile taste," he said to Georg, handing him one and putting the other in his own mouth. The following night there was another air raid warning. Georg realized this when he saw Horst creep right down under the bedclothes, and this meant, of course, that he couldn't see him to talk. He guessed a lot of the children were whimpering, some crying out in fear as memories of the bombing of Rotenbergsort flooded back. The nurses dashed frantically between the rows of beds, threatening jabs for those who couldn't be quiet. This was the most shocking sight of all, trusted adults showing their own fear. Cracks began to appear in Georg's safe world, and in his faith that grown-ups could always protect it. He longed for his mother and sister. When Paula came to visit the following day, she heard from Sister Elfrida how Georg and Horst had thwarted all Kruger's attempts at examination. "I think the boys were quite right," said Elfrida. "Dr. Kruger homed in on Georg straight away. We must make sure he's discharged as soon as possible. His test results are very good now, and I've already spoken to Dr. Braun about him. He feels we could let him go as early as Thursday as long as you can personally nurse him once he's home." Paolo was so relieved. "Thank you, Sister Elfrida." Dr. Braun was one of her previous colleagues from her year at the Children's Hospital. He was a kindly, rather retiring man, never one to push himself forward, dedicated to the welfare of his little patients. "I just hope Kruger will leave the boy in peace now. I hear he has a few other problems at the moment. Did you know he's suspected of sequestering medical supplies to sell on the black market? Good heavens, that's monstrous. He claims it's all malicious slander, of course, but that doesn't alter the fact that he's now got to account for every single item of stock. He's been freed from all other duties to get it done, and Dr. Braun is now in charge of the infection ward instead. But do you think it's true? Has Kruger really been selling to the black market? Who knows? The man's obsessed with his own career, always plays his cards close to his chest, so I think he'd do anything for personal gain." Paula's anxiety eased just a little. Once more, evil had passed her by. She decided, however, not to let Georg spend his convalescence at home in their flat. They would sit it out at his grandparents' allotment again. She assumed that Kruger would never suspect where they were, so hopefully he wouldn't be able to set the Gesundheitspolizei on them. All she had to do now was wait for Thursday, so she occupied her time with packing for herself and the children and preparing for Georg's return. She decided to write an absence note for Amelia, saying she wasn't well and would be off school until the start of the summer holidays. Amelia was delighted. "Will Horst be out soon too?" she asked. "A couple of days later, I think. Maybe he could get fully well at his grandma's. Mama, could you talk to her about it?" "No, Horst is going to be at his parents' flat first of all. That's the best thing for any sick child. To be honest, I wouldn't be taking Georg to the allotment in normal circumstances." "Why not?" "Because he's still in a weak state and needs lots of nursing, and we have no proper bathroom there. But I don't want anyone to know where we are. It wouldn't occur to anyone that we'd take a seriously ill child straight from hospital to stay at the allotment gardens." Amelia looked puzzled, but Paula was so tired after the worry of the last few weeks that she didn't have the mental energy to explain it to her. "It would be lovely if you could help me with the packing. Georg will explain everything to you when he's back." On Thursday, Georg was discharged as promised. "It's still a bit too soon," Dr. Braun cautioned her kindly, "but you're one of us, and you know what needs doing for him. I've got medicine here for him until Monday, and then you'll need a fresh prescription." He handed her the little paper bag and Georg's discharge papers. "Thank you so much, Dr. Braun. You can't imagine how grateful I am." "I think I probably can. To be honest, not all of us are behind what Dr. Kruger represents, although very few have the courage to protest. I know what happened to your husband, and I admire his courage. I'd have been too frightened of the consequences to do the same. You're doing all you can. Nobody can expect more than that." With that, Paula took Georg to the car. His legs were still wobbly, but he was so pleased his allotment garden life could continue. That night there was heavy bombing again, and Paula was relieved she didn't have to bundle the children down into the cellar, as she would have had to if they'd been at home. As usual, Georg and Amelia watched from the small window as the anti-aircraft searchlights latched on to so many aircraft. But a lot of bombs hit their target, and soon there was a different kind of light, the glow of fires burning. "There are more planes all the time," exclaimed Amelia. "They're like giant insects. We need a huge fly swatter to bring down 3 at a time." Paula said nothing. She, too, was looking out of the window, but with unease, not fascination. The fiercest fires were blazing exactly in the location of their flat. The next day, her unease turned into sickening certainty. A bomb had hit their block and destroyed it. All residents, thinking themselves safe in the cellar, were now dead. Paula shuddered as she realized that she and the children owed their lives to the malicious Dr. Kruger. Chapter 43. Tobruk was a disappointment, and its capture had cost effort and lives. Although Richard had his own dedicated psychiatric work, the surgeons still needed his help. In the days leading up to the fall of Tobruk, Fritz constantly pushed himself and often worked 14 hours at a stretch. "You can't go on driving yourself so hard," Richard kept warning his friend. Fritz would brush all this off. "What's a couple hours of lost sleep if you can save a life?" "Yes, but if you collapse, you won't be helping anyone at all." "Don't worry, that won't happen. When Tobruk falls to us, everything'll go back to normal." Fritz had rather hoped that Tobruk would be on the scale of Tripoli, but as they entered the city they realized that wasn't the case. It was simply a little port bordered by a handful of houses with even fewer small shops, empty of all stock, and some abandoned storage sheds. Not even Walter, with his magnificent talent for organization, could make anything of this. They had no choice but to wait for the supply ships to come from Italy. The supply convoy arrived a couple of days later. At last there was enough to eat, even some beer and the long-awaited military post. While Fritz opened his to find a new photo of his wife and children with their beloved Rudy, Richard was struck by the Göttingen postmark on his letter from Paula. What on earth was she doing there? He ripped open the envelope. "My dearest Richard, I don't know whether you ever got my last letter. We haven't heard from you for a long time. I don't want to bore you with the same information, but in case my last note never arrived, you need to know we were bombed out at the end of June. We were fortunate because we were at your parents' allotment, but all our old neighbors were in the cellar at home and were killed in the raid. It's an absolute tragedy. You'd never recognize our street now. Our block has been completely destroyed and the nearby buildings look somehow like the rotting teeth of a giant and are all at risk of collapse." Soon after Whitsun, Georg was in hospital with diphtheria. The hospital got bombed and all the children were moved to Longenhorn. Georg caught Kruger's attention, and I've done everything possible to keep him out of the man's clutches. I'll tell you about it properly when we're together again. After we were bombed out, I thought long and hard about what to do. I could have moved in with your parents or my father, but Kruger was threatening us with the health police, the Gesundheitspolizei. My father still has connections from his time in Göttingen, and so was able to contact Professor Ewald. As a result, I'm now working as a doctor at the Göttingen-Rosdorf Asylum. We're very lucky to have found lodgings with a nice widowed lady whose son is at the front. It's near my work, and we rent 2 rooms from her. Frau Heirath is so kind to the children, especially when I'm out. There's no special school for Georg, unfortunately, but I've made inquiries and have found him a private tutor who comes here 3 times a week. On top of that, he gets to do the same exercises as Amelia as she brings them home from school. I've also managed to get him excused from the Hitler Youth by using the documentation attesting to his impaired hearing being a result of birth trauma. Amelia's been going to the League of German Girls for 3 weeks now. I haven't told her any of our misgivings, as she should be able to take part in summer camps with other girls without any preconceived ideas. She's so obviously having fun and has already asked me if she can go on their spring trip to a youth camp. I'm letting her do all this because she needs the change of scene, and I don't want us to become conspicuous. The girls play various sports, sing together, learn how to do roll call and salute the flag, and even do cross-country activities like the boys. Amelia thinks this is all wonderful and has already made friends among the girls. She's got a lot of pluck as well as being bright, and it does no harm that they learn a bit about housekeeping and cooking, too. Sometimes I find myself looking back at how Fritz used to enjoy the bright side of this new Germany in the days before the war, because he could do nothing about the dark side of it. That's how Amelia is. She should be free to enjoy anything that bears some semblance to a happy childhood. You'd like what I'm doing for Professor Ewald. We treat patients very much in line with your own thinking, and are dealing with the kind of problems that preoccupied you, too. I'll tell you more when you're back on home leave. I'm wondering if your organizational genius, Walter, knows where he can get his hands on some decent civilian clothing. Grab some if you can. Because we were living at the allotment at the time of the bombing, we had most of our clothes here with us, but we couldn't salvage any of yours. It pains me to think how all our books are gone forever, and how we'll never replace some of them, like the Stefan Zweig. Still, we're alive, and I hope our optimism will carry us through the dark days ahead, because good can come from bad if we really believe it. Here in Göttingen, there are hardly any air raids. I hope you're all right. Please do send news soon. Your loving Paula. Fritz noticed how quiet Richard had gone. Bad news? Mixed. The last letter seems to have gotten lost in the post. Paula's moved to Göttingen with the children. Our flat's been bombed. Your flat? Said Fritz in horror. That's right. Paula had gone down to the allotment gardens with the twins. All our neighbors are dead. She says I wouldn't recognize our street now. God, I'm so sorry. But that's not what matters. At least they're all safe. They're alive. What's the news from Doro? Just the usual. She hasn't said anything about Paula or your flat. In fact, she never writes about the bombing. I thought there was less of it. She's probably trying not to worry me. Richard looked bleak. Being on the other side of the world while loved ones were at the mercy of British and American bombing was unbearable. Chapter 44. The new life in Göttingen and her daily work in psychiatry came as a relief to Paula, and at least now she had no need to worry for Georg's safety, although it was a matter of some regret to her that he only had private tuition at home and wouldn't find new friends the way Emilia had. Professor Ewald and Paula's father had been students together and held similar views concerning euthanasia. Paula knew from her father she could trust Professor Ewald, so she told him about Richard's attempt to protect and save patients, and about his failure. That's the crux of the matter. If we overdo things and try to save everyone, we end up saving nobody because the Supervisory Commission in Berlin is on our backs. We have to make the decisions. That's what we've done here from very early on. We've been able to save 2/3 of our patients from death, but I regret to say there have been some we couldn't do anything for. So 1/3 have lost their lives? Paula was shaken. The professor nodded. In asylums with really staunch Nazis at work, only about 1/5 of patients survive, if that's any consolation to you. My sources tell me they've stopped using gas in some large asylums, and instead they create a category called something like the unproductive sick, and leave them to starve or give them an injection of luminol. Paula stared at him, her eyes wide as she took this in. That's horrific. How can any doctor allow this? And we really can't do anything? We can. We can't override the system, as you know, but what we can do is give individual attention to each and every patient and bring as many as possible to safety. That's where I need you, Frau Dr. Helmer.
This is the end of disc number 7. Please insert disc number 8. This is disc number 8.
Do what your husband did, but don't repeat his errors. We can't claim full productive capability for everyone. That gets noticed. But we can intervene sooner. It's not only about the registration forms. It's also about discharging patients early so they can go back to their families or find jobs in workshops whose owners put humanity above profit. Your father told me how your father-in-law saved 3 lives this way. That's right. That's how to do it. At the moment, a mental hospital is one of the most dangerous places in Germany for anyone who is sick. Whatever the bombs don't get rid of, our own people do. Make yourself known to the families and encourage them to take their loved ones home. Frau Dr. Helmer, you are a highly gifted and insightful doctor. Use these gifts to persuade the healthy to help the sick. So that's how Paula came to carry on with Richard's work, but in Göttingen. She had always known that he'd carried a heavy burden, but only now did she fully appreciate what it meant to hold a life in your hands. Over and over again she told herself she wasn't the judge. She hadn't decided that these were the people to die, but at the same time she knew what would befall those she couldn't protect. For a moment she envied Richard, as he hadn't allowed himself to get involved in a selection process, but had instead simply refused to participate by declaring all patients economically productive. Unlike Richard, she now knew she wouldn't be in a position to save anyone if she refused to make a selection. What gave her the most satisfaction was to visit a patient's relatives and persuade them of the wisdom of their loved one coming back home. In most cases, the families were grateful for her candor and for the warning, but not all. Otto Kroll's father was a case in point. Otto was a young man of only 21. He suffered from spastic paralysis and had never learned to talk. He was able to laugh and show emotion, but had to be cared for like a baby. His mother had always looked after him at home, but with her death a few weeks before Paola's visit, Otto's father had decided to place his severely disabled son in the asylum. He gave Paula a warm welcome to his home, even offering her the luxury of an ersatz coffee as she took a seat in the old-style German living room. It reminded her a lot of her father's front room. Framed photographs of rather severe-looking men and women hung on the walls. There was one of a young woman holding a baby. "My wife with Otto soon after he was born," explained Herr Kral when he saw Paula studying it. He was still well at that stage. A few weeks later, he caught meningitis. The man took a deep breath. All the doctors said Otto wouldn't survive, but my wife was like a lioness fighting for her young. You wouldn't believe how often I felt it would have been better if she'd lost that fight. Paula listened in silence. Herr Kral continued talking. "You might think I'm being completely heartless, but Otto was our firstborn. If he'd died, we'd have mourned him, of course, but we might have gone on to have another child, a healthy one. But my Hannelore put all her energy into caring for the child, even though it was clear from the start that he'd stay a baby forever. She refused to let him go into care. He was her purpose in life. She didn't want any more children, and I stood by her because a decent man doesn't leave his wife and a handicapped child. But it wasn't a life. Everything revolved around Otto, and caring for him left Hannelore completely drained. She became terribly thin. I suspected she was giving Otto most of her food ration, although he didn't need much as he didn't move about. She gradually faded and died of pneumonia 6 weeks ago. She'd lost all resistance." He paused to compose himself. "And you'd like me to bring Otto back home, Frau Dr. Helmer? How can that work? I'm expected to work 10 hours a day in an industry that's essential to the war effort. That's why I haven't been sent to the front. And on top of that, I haven't got the will to have him near me. After all, he sent my wife to her death." "I've told you what it would mean for your son to stay in the asylum." Herr Kral nodded. "Yes, I know. What am I supposed to say? Perhaps that's not such a bad thing. Perhaps death is a blessing for someone who's never been a son to me, only a burden, and who lost any purpose in life with the death of his mother. We should break free of all the sentimentality that drove my wife to her grave. Otto should have died 20 years ago instead of being a parasite taking up the place that the healthy children who were never born would have had." He wiped away a tear. "Herr Kral, thank you for talking to me." Paula stood up. "I hope you'll never regret your decision." "I know I won't. But I have always regretted letting my wife keep him at home. I should have put him away 20 years ago. That would have spared us all." Paula was lost for words. Part of her was shocked at Herr Kral's cold-hearted approach to his son's certain death, and yet she found she could understand why. If he had ever felt any love for this child, it had been eaten away by years of worry and privation, and by the destructive effect on his marriage. She wondered whether those who believed in letting the sick and disabled die had experienced something similar, but in different, distant surroundings. How else could people bring themselves to take the lives of those entrusted to them? When she got back to the hospital, she sat down with Otto Kral's form. She completed it according to the rules. Capacity for productivity compared with a healthy individual, 0%. She took the form out of the typewriter and signed it. This was a life she couldn't save, but it could save 2 others from transportation because she would have met her quota. As she sat there thinking this through, she felt the tears flow, and one dropped straight on her signature, making the ink run. She nearly did a fresh one, but decided not to. The murderers weren't interested in whether her signature was legible or smudged by tears. Chapter 45. The war pressed ahead without let-up, and in autumn 1942, Richard and Fritz were deployed to a field hospital at El Alamein. Fritz's brilliance as a surgeon and Richard's effective treatment of the mentally shattered, together with his noticeably improved surgical skills, had, in the eyes of their superiors, made them the perfect team for El Alamein. "I've always wanted to see Egypt, but not like this," commented Fritz. "Oh well, at least we can get a beer here." They were sitting on the steps of the only solid building in the place, now the hospital, drinking their beer straight from the bottle. Over the last few days it had become a bit quieter on the front line, but they'd had a spate of emergency operations to perform after an attack by fighter aircraft. Although their own fighter squadron had scrambled and shot down a couple of enemy planes, the medical help had come too late for 7 German soldiers, and 4 others were so badly wounded they had to be swiftly operated on. "I'd love to see that famous museum in Cairo, said Fritz to Richard. "The one with all the treasures of Tutankhamun and the mummies of the pharaohs. Then there's the Valley of the Kings. When I told the children about it, they were really excited and wanted to come straight over to see it all." He gave a wistful smile. "Yes, I'd like to see all that, especially those old Egyptian burial caves with all the wall paintings, or the pyramids. You went to the British Museum when you were in London, didn't you? Did they allow photography there?" "Don't know, to be honest, as I didn't have a camera anyway, but I did buy a book with pictures of all the exhibits and really detailed descriptions." Fritz sighed. "Sometimes I wonder what Maxwell's doing now, whether he's still in London in his favorite operating theater or whether he's at the front as well. It scares me just to think about it. We last met up in London in May 39 with both of our families." "Oh, I remember, yes, we were looking after Rudy for you." Fritz nodded, lost in thought. "Isn't life mad? Seems as though yesterday he and I were good friends and colleagues, swapping ideas, and now we're all throwing bombs and shooting each other down. And why? Can you tell me? You were always interested in politics. Why are we fighting this bloody war? What was the reason again?" "No idea," said Richard, taking a slug of beer. "Something about Lebensraum in Eastern Europe." "So why are we sitting here in Africa?" "Because the world's gone mad, as you have so eloquently put it." "Aha! This is where the doctors are. Caught you both lounging around." Walter came dashing energetically up the steps toward them. "Come and look at this." "What, an emergency?" asked Fritz. No emergency. Just a nice change. There are a couple of Bedouins over here selling all sorts of fancy stuff, and there's something for the gentlemen, too." "A cold beer? This stuff's too warm," commented Richard. Fritz laughed and Walter rolled his eyes suggestively. "No beer, but a couple of luscious lovelies worth looking at." "Hey, you know we're decent married men," replied Fritz. "Luscious lovelies don't do anything for us, but the rest sounds worth a look. Richard, shall we? Let me get my camera." Same old Richard. Anyway, how do you manage to get new film and developer out here in the desert? I've got stuff left over from when we were in Tripoli. "I remember him buying a whole crate of it in Tripoli," added Walter. "It would have lasted the war photographer a whole year, but Richard zips through it in a couple of months." Richard grinned and went off to fetch his stuff. When he returned, they followed Walter to where the Bedouins had set up their camp. "Isn't anyone wondering whether they're British spies?" asked Richard. "What on earth is there for them to spy on? The British aerial reconnaissance fellows have known for a long time what's here, and our own security forces have questioned everybody in the area." Walter pointed at the army jeeps parked not so far from the camp. "Our lads need a bit of variety, good for morale." But the Bedouin camp had little of the exoticism usually shown in films about the Middle East. No colorful tents with huge interiors littered with silken cushions fit for a sultan, just small, gloomy canvas shelters, outside which sat a few scruffy, undernourished camels. The Bedouins themselves were dressed in gray-brown gowns, and their women, hanging around outside the tents, were of indeterminate age, somewhere between 30 and 50, with bad teeth and weather-beaten faces. "Please tell me our men won't be that desperate," whispered Fritz to Richard. "They're not exactly luscious lovelies." "They've made some nice stuff, though. Look," Richard said, pointing to a stall full of carved scarabs and gods from Egyptian mythology. Fritz picked out a wooden scarab the size of a man's fist, turned it over and showed Richard the hieroglyphics on its underside. "This is a really good reproduction of a heart scarab," he said. He asked the trader how much he wanted for it, and got immersed in a protracted haggling process in a mixture of German, English, and Arabic, while Richard browsed his way around the other goods. He noticed a boy of around 12 squatting behind the trader's tents, carving out more figures. Richard went over. "Do you make all the figures?" he asked. The lad indicated that he spoke no German but a little English. Richard switched to English and asked him what he used as models for his work. "Picture in caves. Many picture," he said. "Caves? What caves?" asked Richard. "Dead people there. No far, no far." The boy looked around all the time as if to be sure no one was watching or listening, then pulled out a battered old scarab and passed it to Richard. "Look, it's from dead people in caves." Richard took the object from him and gave it a good hard look. It came across as genuine, but Richard knew the local traders had a knack for producing convincing fakes, and the probability that the boy was spinning a yarn was high. He replaced the scarab among the carvings still to be worked on. "You think not real? Can say where found. I got good map. Me and Uncle know all about caves." His uncle was still haggling with Fritz. "What kind of map?" Richard's interest had been sparked now. "Wait." The boy vanished inside one of the tents and came back with a piece of parchment. It was well worn, stained, tattered, and some of the symbols were faded, but Richard knew his own map of the area well enough to be sure that this carefully drawn document was accurate. Meanwhile, Fritz had bought the heart scarab and a statue of Anubis. "Have you bought anything?" "Not yet. But this boy doing the carvings reckons the originals of all their merchandise here come from a burial cave nearby. He wants to sell me the map." "Map good," the boy nodded eagerly. "Secret grave, pictures on walls. You buy map? How much do you want for it?" "Hang on there, Richard. You don't believe all this nonsense, surely. These desert shopkeepers will tell you anything to earn a bit of money." "Tell me about this old winged scarab." Richard gestured towards the battered object sitting on a rug in front of the boy. Fritz picked it up and examined it. "I'd say he buried it somewhere for about 6 months to make it look old and valuable." "You may be right, but I'd really like to know where these burial caves are." Richard turned back to the boy. "So what do you want for the map?" 5 marks. 5 marks? Richard was amazed. "I'll give you 20 pfennig." "Old map, only one map of grave, 5 marks. "He knows plenty about German money," said Fritz dryly. "You can drink yourself silly for 5 marks. Then he took a good look at the map himself. "What's your name, my lad?" "Hassan." "Right, Hassan. Before my friend here gives you his hard-earned cash for a fake, show me what your map's good for. Where's our camp?" Hassan immediately showed them not only the exact location of the camp, but also quite deliberately pointed to a symbol in the no-man's land between the German and British front lines where the burial cave was allegedly to be found. "It wouldn't surprise me if our young friend also does business with the Brits," commented Fritz. "He knows the area well, whatever he's up to." "Do you think there could be something in it?" asked Richard. "After all, the biggest archaeological finds came about with the help of grave robbers, didn't they?" Fritz shrugged. "I really don't know. There might be. Buy the map if it'll make you happy." Richard negotiated the boy down to 1 mark and then asked him if he would agree to a photo. Hassan agreed with a big smile, so Richard photographed him at his carving and promised Fritz a print for his children. "And what do you think, Fritz? Shall we take a look there tomorrow?" "You can't seriously believe we'd get a leave of absence for that, surely. A nice trip into no man's land to look for a secret burial site?" He shook his head. "We wouldn't have to say what we wanted the leave for," retorted Richard. "We'll only be away a couple of hours. They can all think we're enjoying the desert flowers or something. Anyway, it's very quiet at the front just now. We can afford the time for a bit of an excursion." "So am I supposed to risk my reputation for this?" said Fritz good-naturedly. "Okay, then I'll sort out the leave of absence. But we'll have to walk for a good hour to get there, so get yourself a compass and some rations. And a torch and my camera, goes without saying. Do you know, this is the craziest thing we've ever done? In what way? I consider it to be absolutely normal. When in Egypt, the typical cultured German will visit ancient burial sites. What would be crazy is not to do it. You know we could get into real trouble for this, don't you? Fritz, be honest, is there anything I've done of late that hasn't gotten me into real trouble? And if we're caught out, what's the big problem? We'll talk our way out of it. Say we went the wrong way, or pretend we'd had a drink or got sunstroke. They're hardly going to put their 2 best doctors in front of the firing squad or on punishment duty. They need us too much here." "Well, you're right there," acknowledged Fritz. "But I'm warning you, if there's nothing there, you owe me a couple of beers." Chapter 46. I'm starting to feel like that Karl May explorer Kara Ben Nimsi, but without the horse, grumbled Fritz, wiping the sweat from his face. Do you really think this thing exists? Well, the map shows quite clearly the pile of 5 stones marking the entrance to the cavern. I think this is a bad idea. Wouldn't it be better to go back before we run into the English or get spotted by an enemy plane? We've come this far, so let's keep going for another 10 minutes or so, then turn back if we still haven't found anything. Fritz was ready to disagree when Richard saw the pile of stones, easily recognizable between some gnarled tree stumps and a patch of dried-out grass. See that? You're right. At least the boy wasn't making it up. They walked towards it with caution, keeping an eye on the surrounding terrain. Nobody was in sight. Are we some away from the British lines? Asked Richard. Fritz looked at the map. I'd say about as far from theirs as we are from ours. Richard was right by the pile of stones now. There's an opening here. It leads downwards. He called out to Fritz, then took off his kit bag, which had food, water, torches, and his camera inside, got down flat on his belly and shone his torch inside. Anything to see? Asked Fritz, crouching down beside him. It doesn't drop down very deep and then it goes level. There really does seem to be some sort of shaft. What if there are snakes down there, something poisonous, or perhaps the place is cursed like the tomb of Tutankhamun? Well, if that's the case, then Hassan wouldn't have come back so cheerful, surely. Okay, agreed, but there still might be snakes and scorpions. Fritz, I never knew you were such a coward. Hey, a bit less of that, please. One of us has to show some common sense, now you've got the explorer bug. I'm going to climb down. Richard got the extra torch out of his kit bag, handed it to Fritz, and reached for his camera. And what am I supposed to do if you get bitten by a snake? You'll think of something. You're a surgeon, aren't you? The opening was very narrow, and Richard eased himself forward on all fours. He gave a start when a little creature darted across his hand, but it was only a lizard, nothing to fear. Composing himself, he continued to make his way, and after about 3 meters, the gallery widened out and led into a small chamber roughly 4 meters square in size. He stood upright and gasped when he caught sight of the many wall paintings showing Egyptian gods. Fritz, this is unbelievable. Come and see. It's all true what the boy told us. Fritz was soon at his side. He'd brought the kit bag with him and cleared away all trace of their presence from the entrance. Just in case a reconnaissance aircraft comes by, he said. They flashed their torches around the chamber. Hey, there's the sarcophagus. Fritz pointed towards a huge sand-colored stone receptacle, its cover broken in 2 on the ground. The inner sarcophagus itself lay empty. Plundered, I might have known. Do you think we're the first Europeans ever to come here? Asked Richard. I should think so. Who on earth would ever pay for an excavation here? The whole area's so inhospitable. He shone his torch on the wall paintings. Look at that. Wonderful. That's the opening of the mouth ceremony. And here you can see Anubis leading the dead towards the throne of Osiris. It's not as impressive as the photos you see of the Valley of Kings, but it's... He suddenly stopped talking. Did you hear that? Hear what? Asked Richard. Fritz drew his pistol from its holster. Torch off. Richard did as he was told, then heard the same as Fritz. From above them came men's voices, speaking English. Instinctively, he too reached for his gun, the first time since his military training. He'd never thought an army doctor would need to use a weapon. Had someone been watching them? Had someone followed them all the way here? Richard's heart pounded. Under the cover of darkness, Fritz pushed his friend back behind the sarcophagus, so they at least had some cover. Over here, Arthur, shouted someone in English as a new beam lit up the chamber. There really is an old tomb here. It's quite remarkable. They heard scratching and scraping as though a second man was now crawling along the gallery. Hey, look, is that a German kit bag? Fritz shot up from behind the sarcophagus. Hands up. He gave the order in English. Richard was on his feet too and trained his pistol and torch on the 2 British soldiers, who were stunned to find themselves confronted by a pair of German officers. Slowly they raised their hands. We're from the medical service, said one of them. We're not in a fighting unit. Fritz looked more closely at the man opposite him. Maxwell? Maxwell Cooper? Yes, came the hesitant reply. Richard saw how the Brit was trying to see their faces in the glare of the torches. "Do we know each other?" "It's me, Fritz Ellerweg." "Fritz, good Lord, you really do get everywhere." "Listen, this is really awkward for all four of us, but tell me honestly, how many more of you are lurking outside?" "None," said Maxwell, earning a kick in the shin from his companion. "None?" said Fritz. "Do you give me your word?" "I do." "Good. Then we can talk as the old friends we are? Put away our guns. Or do you insist on war?" "I rather think this place looks a bit like Switzerland," said Maxwell, "and medical officers don't wage war." "Agreed," Fritz said, lowering his gun, but Richard kept his gun where it was, pointing straight at the two Englishmen. He reverted to German with Fritz, saying to his friend, "Can't you at least tell them to take off their gun belts? Maxwell's a good friend of mine. He wouldn't lie to me. And the other one? Looks really sinister. I wouldn't trust him an inch." "Keep it that way," the second man snarled in German. "I can't stand you damned Krauts." "See? We'll have to watch that one." "Stop all that, Arthur," hissed Maxwell. "Don't tell me to trust a German," said Arthur icily, and in English this time. "The position you're in, you have no choice," said Richard. He spoke in English so as not to exclude Maxwell from the dialogue. "I am the one with the gun. It is for me to decide whether I trust you." Maxwell tried to smooth things over. "Listen, my colleague's home was bombed in the latest air raid over London. It was sheer luck that his wife wasn't home. She'd never have survived it." This only stoked up Richard's anger. "Oh, so does he think he's the only one? My own home was razed to the ground by British bombers, and our neighbors met a miserable end in the basement where they'd gone for shelter. It was luck, too, that my wife and children weren't at home. But the difference between the two of us is that I know how to distinguish between the Royal Air Force and an innocent party." He gave Arthur a long, hard look, the camera hanging around the Englishman's neck catching his eye and prompting his next remark. "Anyway, you can't despise all Germans if you go around with a Leica 2 on show, or is that a battle trophy?" "I didn't say that I despise all Germans," retorted Arthur. "I said I didn't trust any." "You don't have to do that," said Richard. "It's enough if you give me your word not to shoot if I put my gun down, even if it's naive and stupid of me to trust an embittered Brit." Arthur hesitated. "You have my word," he said with a nod. "Well, at last," said Richard, stowing away his pistol. Fritz and Maxwell both sighed with relief. "So what on earth are you both really doing here?" asked Maxwell. "Yesterday we bought a map from a Bedouin boy that shows the route to an undiscovered tomb," explained Fritz. "We thought we'd have a look, seeing as it's quieter at the front at the moment." "A map? Is it like this?" Maxwell reached into his uniform jacket pocket, pulled out a folded parchment, and slowly opened it out. Richard and Fritz stared at the map. "That little trickster," hissed Fritz, as Richard got their own map out of his kit bag. "Here's mine." He showed it to the two Englishmen. "Identical, right down to the well-thumbed edges. Seems to be a flourishing Bedouin business model." Maxwell burst out laughing. "I bought mine over a week ago, but it was only today it felt safe enough for a jaunt into no man's land. We thought, oh well, the enemy's quiet, nobody'll notice if we're out for a while." "Our logic, too," Fritz grinned. "Isn't it nice of the enemy to give us a bit of peace so we can indulge our cultural interests?" "Nobody would believe us. Have you been here for long?" asked Maxwell. "No, we got here just before you. May I introduce my closest friend, Dr. Richard Helmer. We met during our first semester as young students." Richard and Maxwell shook hands. "And this is Dr. Arthur Grifford," said Maxwell, presenting his companion. "We haven't known each other as long as you two, but long enough to have been on a few mad trips." He laughed. Arthur Grifford didn't look too pleased about the friendly introduction and accepted Fritz's outstretched hand only after some hesitation. "I knew those Bedouins had a deal with the enemy," he muttered to himself. "I wouldn't call it a deal. They just sell both sides their rubbish," observed Richard. Arthur ignored him so as to avoid shaking hands with yet another German. Meanwhile, Fritz was enthusiastically shining his torch on the wall behind the sarcophagus. "Maxwell, you're the hieroglyph expert. What does all this say?" "Hang on," It looks really interesting." Maxwell went over to him and started explaining the significance of the various images. Arthur clapped his hand to his forehead in frustration. "Headache?" asked Richard, keeping a sharp eye on him still. Arthur's tone was icy again. "We've got other problems at the moment, more than hieroglyphs." "You're right there," conceded Richard. "Getting any decent photographs in this light is a real challenge. Well, for you, that is. I've got a Leica 3, you see." He held out his camera for Arthur to see. "This one doesn't need such a long exposure time, and I've got a good flash. Sometimes it's worth investing in the latest technology, instead of making do with a cheaper, older model." "Show off." Richard laughed. He trained his camera on the painted walls and took a number of shots. Although Arthur had obviously decided to treat the Germans with utter disdain, Richard noticed how interested he was in the finer details of the camera, although he was too proud to ask him any questions. Meanwhile, Fritz and Maxwell seemed to have completely forgotten there was a war on. They were exchanging news about their families, showing one another the photographs they always carried with them. "Harry's really grown," exclaimed Maxwell. "And is that lovely young woman really little Sarah? She'll be married before you know where you are, then it'll be Grandpa Maxwell." Arthur made very obvious coughing noises. "Frog in your throat?" Richard's quip didn't raise a smile. He thought for a moment, then decided it was time for some straight talking. "Listen, I can understand why the war makes you detest every German, but presumably you didn't always feel like that. You speak German, you use a German camera, and your colleague here is good friends with a German." He nodded towards Fritz and Maxwell, deep in conversation about new methods in surgery. Maxwell was listening attentively, while Fritz explained how skin grafts he had carried out during the amputation process could guarantee better results in any later use of prosthetics. "You surgeons are a breed apart," said Arthur. "I'm not a surgeon, actually." "Really? So what are you?" "I'm a psychiatrist." Arthur gave a low whistle. "You could do with sorting out Hitler, then." "I'm a psychiatrist, not a miracle worker." Arthur hesitated before carrying on. "You won't lose your rag if I say a few bad things about your wonderful leader, then?" "He's not my wonderful leader. I didn't vote for him." "That doesn't tell me anything. You're all always cheering him." "You have absolutely no idea what's been happening on the ground in Germany over the last 10 years or so." Arthur fell silent. "So, what's your specialism?" Richard expected a touchy reply, and so was surprised when Arthur simply said, "General medicine." "I had no desire to go to the front," said Arthur. "But once we'd been bombed out at home, it seemed like a good solution. My wife's a nurse and reported for duty at the field hospital at the same time. I reckon we're the only couple both to enter the medical corps. It's not how we planned our future together, to be quite honest, but there's no point in having a family now, and who knows how long this war will drag on." "Didn't your wife want to come and see the tomb as well?" "We didn't tell anyone what we were planning. They'd all have said we were insane. I didn't even tell Lisa." Neither spoke for a while. Fritz and Maxwell had moved on to the effectiveness of antibiotics. "Did you sign up of your own accord?" Arthur asked Richard. "Long story. It's almost as incredible as us meeting here in this tomb." "Will you tell me?" Richard could hear that Arthur's icy tone had vanished. Had he managed to penetrate the Englishman's armor? Or maybe he was making the best of the situation because he knew Maxwell and Fritz would carry on talking for a while yet. "Okay, why not? You're welcome to pass it on to your press scribblers, but leave my name out of it if you want to spare my family. I can't possibly broadcast this in Germany. It could literally be fatal, but the world must know." "I'm intrigued. Go on." So Richard told him about the law for the prevention of progeny with inherited diseases, about how, as a psychiatrist, it was his job to write expert statements assessing patients' productivity, about the killing of those considered unworthy of life. Arthur's face registered increasing disbelief as he listened. "In the end, it all came out that I deliberately falsified registration forms in order to save my patients. I was dismissed without notice and escaped a punishment battalion only by signing up of my own volition for the medical battalion." "It's absolutely unbelievable." "It's absolutely true." Richard struggled to hide his bitterness. No, don't misunderstand me. I wasn't questioning what you say. It's just that I'm lost for words. I've been lost for words for a long time, said Richard. At the moment, my wife's trying to do her bit. She's a doctor trying to spare as many of the sick and handicapped as she can, but it's a struggle. Fritz gave Richard a nudge. I wouldn't like to break up your new friendship, you two, but I fear it's time for us to get moving. Have you taken any pictures? Maxwell asked Arthur. No, my camera can't cope with the light down here. Richard grinned. When the war's over, I'll send you a couple of prints. It's definitely paid off getting a Leica 3. Show off, said Arthur again. This time it was said in a spirit of fun. As we were the first to arrive, it's probably best if we're the first ones to leave, Fritz suggested, and you two had better wait until we're out of sight. What do we do if your or our people are running around outside? Maxwell wondered. Okay, if any of them catch us together, just play it depending on whose side it is. If they're Brits, you say that we're your prisoners, and if they're ours, then you're our prisoners. But are medical officers allowed to take one another prisoner? Asked Richard. I don't think anyone's ever expected anything like this to crop up, to be honest. Then we need to make sure we don't establish a precedent. Maxwell smiled, then said his farewells to Fritz, enthusiastically sending his warm regards to Dorothea and the children. If someone had told me when I got up this morning that I'd be telling a German it had been a pleasure to meet them, I'd never have believed it, said Arthur. But that's the case. Perhaps we'll even meet up after the war. Never say never, replied Richard, shaking hands with Arthur. Then they all made their way out of the burial chamber as planned, and back to their own lines, unscathed and undiscovered. I owe you 2 beers, said Fritz when they were safely back in their quarters. That trip to the tomb was a really good idea. The whole world has gone mad, but at least some things stay the same. Maxwell told me about a few really interesting medical developments, and I explained rotation flap surgery to him. That was the long-overdue conference you've been wanting to attend, Richard said, laughing. And all set against the backdrop of ancient history and high culture, too. Can't wait to see those photos. Chapter 47. In her efforts to spare as many patients as possible from transfer to the death camps, Paula turned next to the church. She had fully expected most parish leaders to be responsive to her concerns, but in fact came up against highly varied degrees of willingness to help. 3 of the pastors she approached were immediately ready to pitch in with practical support, but many others were evasive and one rejected her outright, warning her not to go around spreading such stories. It was only then that she realized that this pastor's front room boasted a Hitler portrait, so even their spiritual leaders were not immune to signing up to the NSDAP. She resolved to be more careful next time. But she was even more taken aback when a well-known member of the NSDAP offered to employ 4 of her patients on light duties in his own painting and decorating business. He explained his decision to her. Look, I've never been particularly interested in politics and only joined the party in 1938 because I couldn't have kept my business going otherwise. I could see that party members were getting all the work contracts, but that's never meant that I condone what's going on here. Pastor Weinheim knows that, and that's why he mentioned you to me. When times are tough, we have to find ways and means of getting things done. Paula nodded. Even Professor Ewald had become a member of the NSDAP, and thus of the NS Medical Association. From the outset, however, this had never stopped him from speaking out against euthanasia, even though nobody in authority listened, and he himself had to find a way of saving as many of his own patients as he could. And what was the right way? Taking direct action against the system could lead to your own death. Alfred Scher was just one example. Then there was Richard's way, where he'd refused to comply, but failed. All that remained was to walk the tightrope between adapting and resisting. She couldn't save everyone, whatever she did. It was similar to triage on the battlefield, when doctors had to decide who to treat on the spot and who was already beyond help. Paula wished Richard was there with her, or her father at least. She'd have given anything to pick up the phone, but her landlady didn't have such a thing, and the only one at the hospital was in the ward office, where her colleagues could hear every word. What brought her some comfort was the first letter from Leonie for 3 months. My dear Paula, your last letter took all of 6 weeks to get here and has brought such distressing news. Everything I hear from Germany is so sad and depressing. Thank God you all escaped the bombing of your home. I may be far away, but I can't tell you how much I feel for you and the children. I hope very much that Göttingen keeps you all safe from the bombs. Richard and Fritz are often in my thoughts too, and I hope they'll return unharmed from this war. Everything continues to go well for us here. We're distanced from the conflict, although there are huge numbers of refugees seeking a new home in Switzerland. They are overwhelmingly Jewish. What we hear is so terrible, with rumors of ghettos, of camps in the east, but nobody knows exactly what's going on. I've volunteered to help care for the many children coming in as refugees. Many have lost their parents, and many more were sent off to make the journey alone. We've heard that high-ranking Nazis are pocketing bribes, and the money serves only to take the children to initial safety. Think how desperate these people must be that they're sending their children off alone to another country. My father is always so glad we left when we did, when all routes were still open to us. Any worries of mine are insignificant compared with yours. I've had to do battle at work to survive in this male world of hospital doctors, but I've coped. A few weeks ago, I became the first ever female senior consultant in this place. As well as that, I adopted a little girl 2 months ago. Her name's Arlette. She's 3 years old, comes from France, and was in a camp for Jews to be deported to Poland. Her parents died from typhus. The conditions there must have been appalling. Arlette was among a group of children saved by members of the French resistance and brought here to us in Switzerland. At first she was deeply disturbed, sat in silence in the corner, wouldn't eat or speak. My heart went out to her. I knew immediately that I wanted to look after this child with the huge sad eyes and give her something of what she's so painfully lost. Sometimes I ask myself whether, amid all the horror, there really is a higher power guiding us, and whether it's always been meant that I'd find Arlette. She's starting to speak a little German now, and at times I can even get a little smile. So you see, I've achieved everything I wanted, but in ways I'd never have dreamt possible. But our old life in Hamburg comes back to me in my dreams. Our time together as young students, those wonderful hours spent by the Alster, and everything that we both loved so much. If I could turn back the clock, I'd do it all again and not change a single thing. Keep your courage up, Paula, and let's hope this dreadful war ends soon so we can see each other and you can meet Arlette. I'd like so much to see Amelia and Georg, too, and how much Fritz's Henrietta has grown, and of course meet little Harry for the first time. If you need anything, please be sure to let me know. I'll do everything I can. Your dear friend, Leonie. Leonie's letter left Paula pensive. Her friend was successful and had an adopted daughter, albeit one with such a sad story. She hoped that Leonie's care and love would help her grow up to be contented. At the same time, she found herself wondering what kind of life her own family would have had if they, too, had emigrated in 1936. A life without war and bombs. A life spent worrying about the loved ones left back home. A life in which she'd have been reduced to a passive observer of all these events. No, they'd been right to stay. Unlike Leonie, they'd had the choice. Germany was their homeland, and it was worth the fight not to allow all their old values to be trampled into the dust, even if that fight had to take place in silence and away from the ear of the authorities and hateful informants. The weekly newsreels continued to report victories for the Afrika Korps, but Richard's letters made things sound rather different. At the beginning of November, German troops were finally defeated at El Alamein and had to retreat to Tunis. Richard still sent home photos as if he were on a research expedition and not in the thick of war. Among them was one of Egyptian wall paintings in what appeared to be a dark and narrow vault. He'd simply described it as a newly discovered tomb. It wouldn't have been wise to put the whole story in a letter likely to be scrutinized. At Christmas, Fritz and Richard were both granted home leave. They were now working at the main military hospital in Tunis, and there were plenty of other doctors. The train to Hamburg went through Göttingen, so Fritz and Richard did most of the journey together. The train even had a 15-minute wait at Göttingen, so Fritz had a chance to see Paula and the children. "I'm so sorry about your flat and the bombing," he said to her. After what we've all been through together, it would have been wonderful if we could have spent Christmas together, too. Yes, it would have been, and I do miss Hamburg, but it would have been too risky for Georg, even if we hadn't been bombed out of house and home. Fritz was about to say more, but the guard had his whistle at the ready, and Richard felt it was time to stop talking. If you don't hurry up, you really will be spending Christmas with us instead of with Doro and your two. I love you all, but Doro and the children come first, Fritz said as he climbed back on board. See you here in 7 days when it's back to Tunis for us, Richard. They stood watching the train until it disappeared from sight. Papa, what's Tunis like? Nothing like as nice as here with you, and we used up your special cream ages ago. I'll need another pot to take back with me. Amelia giggled. But Papa, it's nearly 2 years since I got you that one. Wartime thrift. Look, I've still got the pot. And he pulled it out of his pocket to show her. While Amelia reveled in the fact that her gift had been treasured for so long, Georg asked about the photos that Richard had sent them. Where was the tomb you described in your letter, Papa? That was in Egypt. A Bedouin lad tipped us off, and so Uncle Fritz and I went off to look for it, found it, and took some pictures. But the sarcophagus itself had been looted and the mummy stolen. All we saw were the wall paintings. As they made their way to the bus stop, the children were full of questions still. Paula noticed how Richard often hesitated before replying. Once they'd got back to Frau Heiroth's flat and Paula had introduced Richard to their landlady, she seized the first opportunity alone together to ask him what it had really been like for him over there. She was preparing herself for horrific tales of blood and death, and assumed he would want to spare the children the gore, so she was surprised when he regaled her with the full story of discovering the tomb. I wasn't sure that Amelia would be able to keep the story to herself, he confided. As a child, I don't think I could have, to be honest. He grinned. And I don't want the whole world to know Fritz and I have had contact with the enemy. It would put us in a very bad light. You and Fritz are impossible, Paula said, shaking her head and laughing fondly. I bet it didn't even enter your heads that it might be dangerous. Not really, he admitted ruefully. I don't think our English colleagues thought about it either. Well, you know, you don't shoot your colleagues, do you? Is that so? Said Paula dryly. I thought being a soldier was the only profession where you'd shoot at colleagues if they work for someone else. Richard burst out laughing. That's a good one. I must tell Fritz, although he'll just say that we're doctors, not soldiers. Seriously, though, Richard, be honest with me. What's it really like at the front? The newsreels are always telling us about great victories, but you write to me about retreating. Do you believe we're winning the war? I have no idea, but I do know that the magnificent victories you're being told about are mostly retreats. At El Alamein we lost hundreds of men. Fritz was working to his absolute limit. There were days when he'd stand at the operating table for 14 hours at a stretch, and yet life slipped through our fingers so many times. And none of the vehicles cope well in the desert atmosphere. The tank division is always moaning about breakdowns, and the mechanics are almost as busy as the doctors. Flesh can heal, bones can knit, but the machines have no spare parts and fuel is short. Then there are all the infectious diseases caught from contaminated drinking water. Fritz and I stick to beer when we can get it. I reckon if everything else is going like it is in Africa, then we need to be prepared to take a few whippings in the next 6 months. Christmas flew by all too fast. While they'd celebrated it in their own flat the previous year and had pictured life continuing as normal, here they were now in cramped lodgings, with their landlady feeling wretched about her son who was fighting in Stalingrad. Nonetheless, Richard put up a fine Christmas tree, and Frau Heiroth looked out all her own decorations for it. Presents arrived from Hamburg for the grandchildren, and Richard had brought them a beautifully carved set of chess pieces, the figures all from ancient Egyptian mythology. I think you're old enough to grasp chess now, he explained as the twins gazed at the pieces in fascination. So between Christmas and New Year, the children learned the basics of chess with great enthusiasm. The 2nd of January, when Richard was due to return, came all too soon. Snow was falling and the air had turned icy, and as they made ready for the long and difficult journey to the railway station, Paula thought wistfully of their car, still garaged at her father-in-law's place in Hamburg. Well, that's the one good thing about Africa, "The weather's much better," Richard said in an attempt to raise a few smiles as they arrived at the station. When his train rolled in, he hugged Paula and the children one last time. Fritz was waving from the window of their compartment. Richard handed up his case, then pushed his way in through the doors, along with all the other soldiers. "Do you think Papa will be able to stay with us forever after next Christmas?" asked Amelia as they stood waving at the disappearing train. "Let's hope so," replied Paula. That was the first time she had caught herself thinking she no longer wanted to contemplate the future. Chapter 48. Throughout January and February, Paula's life in Göttingen became a cheerless daily grind. She continued to fight on behalf of her patients and even managed to find more employment opportunities for them within businesses willing to help out. But still, the war cast its shadow over everything. At the end of January, Frau Heiroth received the letter feared by every parent. Her son had fallen at Stalingrad. Paula did her utmost to console and support her landlady through this harrowing experience. Then in February, they heard that the Sixth Army had been decimated at Stalingrad, and any survivors had ended up as Russian prisoners of war. In spite of this dark news, Paula felt some relief that all reports from the African front continued to be positive. She couldn't begin to picture what any transfer to the Eastern Front would have meant for Richard. All reports about conditions in the prisoner of war camps were horrific. With the arrival of May, the children were at last able to play outside and take regular dips in the little lake near their home. Meanwhile, news came that German troops in Tunisia had surrendered on May 13th, and more than 150,000 German soldiers were now British prisoners of war. For Paula, the expression Tunisgrad reminded her too much of Stalingrad, and her fears for Richard's safety grew. She'd last heard from him in March. To share her worries with someone, she phoned Dorothea in Hamburg from the hospital. She'd heard nothing from Fritz either, and had already turned to the Red Cross in an attempt to establish whether her husband was among the prisoners of war. All they could do was feed me a few empty promises and say the situation was very unclear. It could be our letters haven't come because of so many supply ships being sunk. Maybe both our men are safe and sound somewhere. Yes, was all Paula could say. How she hated the uncertainty. But she was forced to live with it over the next few weeks as neither she nor Dorothea received word from their husbands. By Richard's 42nd birthday, July 23rd, Paula still didn't know whether or not he was alive. How was she supposed to carry on reassuring the children when she herself was close to despair? But when she came home from work that evening, Amelia greeted her with even more excitement than usual. "Mama, there's a letter from Papa at last." She waved the distinctive field post envelope as she ran towards her mother. "Exactly on his birthday. It makes it seem as though he's here too." Paula took the envelope from her daughter and hungrily searched for clues. Richard had a new military mail number. She felt weak with relief. He hadn't ended up a prisoner of war. He was alive. "My dearest Paula, I haven't heard from you for a long time and fear my recent letters haven't reached you either. The final weeks in Tunis were disastrous. It was clear we would have to surrender. All the field hospitals were dismantled and made ready for travel. Fritz had arranged for us to accompany one of the last hospital ships bound for Italy. Together with all the wounded men in our care, we reached Sicily in May, only for Allied troops to capture the island in early July. Our leaders decided the wounded should be left in the care of Italian civilian doctors, while all military medical staff were promptly shipped off to the mainland. So here we are in Rome awaiting orders. They may send us to France. I don't know whether we'll keep this mail number or get a different one. I must admit, it's wonderful to be back in Rome, and guess what? Luigi's little shop is still there. His eldest son runs it for him these days and still has stocks of photographic film. I told him how we'd been there in September 1928, and he actually remembered something of our visit because it was the only time anybody had ever bought their entire stock of film. Just like before, the people here are very friendly and open, but there's growing unrest within the country. Many have had enough of Il Duce, but will only say so off the record. I'm afraid things will soon erupt here, and Mussolini won't know what's hit him. The people here are so weary of war, they're desperate for peace. But while their government goes on preaching conflict, there are only two choices: victory or downfall, and most people here no longer believe in any glorious end to all this. There are, of course, always the eternal optimists who believe in miracle weapons and final victory, but anyone with a modicum of intelligence knows that after what has happened at Stalingrad and Tunis, only the long drawn-out path to the inevitable remains. But rest assured that Fritz and I are in a safe place and enjoying Rome. As ever, I'm enclosing some photos. With all my love, Richard. Paula studied the 3 photos closely. Richard and Fritz in uniform standing in front of the Colosseum. Luigi's shop looking much the same as it had 15 years ago. Then one of the Roman Forum, with a comment from Richard written on the back. Ruins are only beautiful if they're at least 2,000 years old. On Saturday, Paula phoned Dorothea from the hospital line and told her about Richard's letter. Dorothea's joy almost bounced down the line. Wonderful. That means I'll hear from Fritz soon. I'd love to be in Rome right now. What I'd give for some decent sleep and just one night without bombing. The main thing is that our menfolk are safe. Everything else can carry on as normal in the meantime. Rudy started barking in the background, and Paula could also hear the sound of Henrietta and Hari squabbling. "Sorry, I'll have to stop now," said Dorothea. "Sounds as though our own war has broken out here. Shall we talk again on Monday?" "Yes, I'll call you as soon as I can then. Perhaps your letter will have come by then too." For just a moment, a ray of light seemed to break through the gloom, and Paula permitted herself the luxury to hope that the worst was over. Chapter 49. Rome was paradise for Richard and Fritz after so many months in North Africa. They both worked in one of the hospitals dedicated only to military staff and could continue to do so, provided they were not deployed elsewhere. This meant that Richard could devote himself to psychiatric work again, and as they had fixed working hours, they could take time out to enjoy the Eternal City. Richard had started an Italian course every Monday, and persuaded Fritz to go along with him. "The war's got to have some use," remarked Richard, "even if it's just learning a new language. I suppose you'll have us learning French if we get set off to France, won't you?" Fritz still teased his rather serious friend at every opportunity. "Let's see if there's time," Richard said with a grin. During their Italian class on August 9th, Richard's thoughts were taken up with his children even more than usual. Today was the twins' 11th birthday. It was the 3rd birthday they'd had to spend without him. He'd hoped it would be the last time he'd be so far away on their special day. Fritz noticed how quiet and subdued his friend was. "Are you thinking about the children?" Richard nodded. The class helped distract them both. That evening they returned to their lodgings and the latest military mail delivery. There was nothing for Richard this time, but a letter had come for Fritz. "At last," he shouted, but then faltered. "This is from Professor Wehmeyer." He was puzzled. He ripped open the envelope and read the letter in silence. Richard saw the color drain from his face and his body start to tremble. The letter fell to the floor. "Fritz, what is it?" Fritz couldn't speak. His face was completely without expression. He stared straight in front of him. "Fritz!" Still no reply. Richard bent to pick up the letter. Fritz didn't react, so Richard started reading. Still no reaction. "My dear colleague Herr Ellerweg, it is extremely difficult for me to have to be the one to bring you this news. I fear, however, that nobody else here has felt able to take this on. Starting on the night of July 24th, Hamburg has experienced the worst bombing raids imaginable. British bombers pounded our beloved home city with incendiaries until August 3rd, targeting our residential areas. We still don't know how many people have died. The streets are littered with charred bodies, and early estimates speak of 40,000 dead. With the greatest of sadness, I have learned that your wife and 2 children, Henrietta and Hari, all fell victim to this cowardly attack. Your father managed to save himself at first, but the shock led to a major heart attack and he died 2 days later in our hospital. Please accept my deepest and most sincere condolences. I always considered your wife, Dorothea, to be one of the best theater nurses I had ever worked with. Your father was a most empathetic colleague. It breaks my heart to think of your children's happy laughter, now forever silenced. I wish I could find the words to ease the terrible pain in some way, but the tragedy that has befallen our flourishing city is too dreadful for any words. In deepest sympathy, your colleague, H.P. Wehmeyer. My God, Fritz, I am so very sorry. Richard could do no more than whisper. Fritz was still staring straight ahead, his face expressionless, but then he suddenly let out a cry of such pain and torment that Richard's blood ran cold. Before he realized what was happening, Fritz had seized a bedside lamp and hurled it against the wall, where it shattered into pieces. Someone flung open the door to their shared room. What's going on? This was Dr. Buchwald, who shared the room next door with another colleague. Get away from me, Fritz roared, seizing a chair and flinging it against the wall. Fritz, calm yourself. This won't help, Richard urged his friend, but in vain. Fritz was raging like a madman. Dr. Buchwald brought Franke, his roommate, to help Richard, who swiftly put them in the picture. He's just heard that his wife, children, and father have all died during the latest air raids. Richard was trying to hold Fritz. Oh God, how terrible! Dr. Buchwald himself had gone white. I need Evipan. Richard looked straight at Dr. Buchwald. Quickly. No, roared Fritz. Don't inject me. Keep still, Fritz, said Richard, using all his strength to hold his dear friend down on the floor. He feared the despair could drive him to destroy everything in the room. Dr. Buchwald hurried back with the Evipan at the ready and helped his colleague hold Fritz long enough for Richard to administer the injection. It took only a few seconds for Fritz's muscles to slacken and relax. They lifted him onto the bed. This is strictly between us, said Richard. He'll be his old self tomorrow, you have my word. The two colleagues nodded and left. The effects of the Evipan lasted about an hour, and then Fritz slowly came around. You just drugged me, he groaned. That's right, you gave me no choice. Fritz stared at the ceiling. Tell me it isn't true, Richard. Tell me someone's playing some terrible joke on me. You know that would be a lie, said Richard quietly. Can you explain why it's always me? Why it's always my children? First Gottlieb, now Henrietta and Harry? Why? And Doro and my father. They've never harmed anyone. They were all completely innocent, had nothing to do with the war. Can you tell me why the Royal Air Force Base would deliberately target residential areas, murdering countless innocent people? I can't explain any of it. Richard felt helpless. He seized his friend by the hand. You've had the worst time any man could have. I beg you not to give up, Fritz. I need you. You're my closest friend. I don't want to lose you. Don't worry. I'm not going to shoot myself or jump out of a window. Doro was a practicing Catholic after all. She'd have no truck with suicide. In the weeks following his loss, Fritz was desolate and became very introverted, but Richard knew his friend was trying to fight back and finding refuge in his work. He saw how Fritz took on extra shifts and pushed himself to the limit and beyond, as he had done in Tunis and Tobruk. The difference this time was that he was doing it more for himself than for the wounded men. The more he worked, the less space there was for the pain. Richard heard from his own father that they too had been bombed out of their home and that the workshop had been completely destroyed. At least no one had died. Margit and her family now lived at the Moorfleet allotment garden, while Richard's parents had moved in with Paula's father, whose house remained untouched. Meanwhile, in Italy, the political unrest continued to grow. Mussolini had been toppled by his own people, but Hitler had helped him suppress the rebellion and he came back to power. The Italians no longer felt themselves to be a united nation, and the Germans were an occupying force who propped up Mussolini. Both Richard and Fritz noticed how the mood was shifting, how disgruntled locals now gave them and their uniforms contemptuous glances, instead of the previous open and friendly reception. The expected posting to France, To Cherbourg, in fact, came at the end of November 1943. I'd have gone for Paris myself. What are we supposed to do in a seaside resort out of season? Fritz had recently regained his sense of humor, but it wasn't without a cynical edge. Yes, the weather could be better, said Richard in wry agreement, but at least this way we're getting closer to our home country. What's left of it. Come on, let's look at what passes for a field hospital here and make ourselves useful. When Christmas came, Fritz decided to forego his leave. I've got nowhere to go back to, he said. You could come to us. Thanks. I know you mean well, Richard, but it would remind me too much of what I've lost. No, I'd rather stay here. Richard traveled home to his family with mixed feelings that year. On the one hand, he was looking forward to seeing them, but on the other, he was extremely worried about Fritz. He knew how little joy his friend now found in life. Chapter 50. Christmas that year was the most cheerless Paula had ever known. For the first time in their young lives, Emilia and Georg understood death. It was no longer an unknown that happened to other people. The deaths of Fritz's children had torn a huge hole in their lives, more than any other wartime death. When Jürgen had fallen early in 1940, the twins had been 7 and had simply accepted it. They hadn't seen their older cousin that often and so didn't have a strong attachment to him. But they'd grown up with Henrietta and Harry. On top of all this, Frau Heiroth was still in mourning for her son and constantly full of bad tidings. Paula hated this dismal atmosphere and would have preferred to move out, but accommodation was in short supply. She was relieved when Frau Heiroth announced she was planning to spend Christmas with her sister. When Richard arrived home, his mood was not a great deal better than that of their landlady. He was deeply concerned about his friend and feared that he was taking risks with his safety. He mentioned this over the Christmas meal. There was only a basic meatloaf this year, with potatoes and a bit of red cabbage. Will Uncle Fritz die too? Emilia asked. What makes you ask that, Poppet? Well, if he's not paying attention to his safety and he stayed at the front. She hesitated. But you'll pay attention, won't you, Papa? Always, Poppet, and I always look out after Uncle Fritz, too. What happens when someone dies? Chipped in Georg. Where do we go when we're dead? Paula was about to talk about all the souls going to heaven, but Richard got in first. Nobody knows, he said. Today of all days, why did Richard have to be so damnably honest? Couldn't he just have come up with the usual line about paradise? But there was no stopping him now. Life is a great mystery, you know. Medicine can do a lot, but there's one thing it can't do, and that's bring the dead back to life. If someone dies because his heart has stopped beating, we can't just bring him round again with a new heart. The spark of life has gone out, and we don't know what kindled it in the first place. The church calls it the spirit. It's like a car engine breaking down. You get a replacement engine and have it fitted, and the car works again, but only with a driver at the wheel. If the driver gets out and goes off, it doesn't matter how many new engines the mechanic puts in place. The car won't go on its own. So is the spirit the driver? Asked Emilia. Yes. And it gets out when the body's broken down instead of waiting to be repaired. So where does it go, this spirit? Does it look for a new car like the driver does? Hindus and Buddhists believe that the spirit seeks out a new body that is not yet born and is then reborn as either a human or an animal. Christians believe that the spirit goes back to God and must first go to purgatory to be cleansed of all its bad deeds. If the spirit has been particularly bad, then it has to suffer permanently in hell. I believe anything is possible. Perhaps some spirits drift into nothingness and stop existing because they've existed for long enough. Whatever it may be, we'll only find out when we die ourselves. And what about ghosts? Asked Georg. Do you think that many spirits turn into ghosts? Ghosts don't exist, retorted Emilia. Well, not like in the kind of ghost stories you've perhaps heard, Richard said, backing her up. But there may be some spirits that float around for a while in the place where their body died. Do you think that Henrietta, Hari, and Aunt Dorothea are still floating around in the ruins? Definitely not. If they were going to float around anywhere, it would be near Uncle Fritz, and they'd be telling him that they're all right. But they've never shown up there. That's why I think they've been in a better place for a long time. In any case, no one knows which way they've gone. When Richard and Paula were in their bedroom much later that evening, she gently admonished him. I hope the children won't have nightmares about that conversation. Couldn't you just have told them the usual? No, he replied without hesitation. I had to be perfectly honest with them and tell them what I myself believe. They're too old now for fairy tales. You think Christian teaching is a fairy tale? No, I see it as a parable that helps people make sense of the incomprehensible. In times like these, I prefer my story about the car. Richard, you're incorrigible. I know, you tell me often enough. He burst into such infectious laughter that Paula couldn't help but do the same. Then she whispered in his ear, Do you know how much I love you? He whispered back, As much as I do you? At least as much as that, and I just wouldn't know what to do if I were ever to lose you. Promise me you'll always come back to us unharmed, whatever happens. I've promised you that right from the start, and I hereby renew my promise. Please don't worry, we're sitting tight in Cherbourg now. No Allied general would dare land in the middle of Normandy. Everything will be fine, Paula, I promise you. The festive season, with its hint of a normal family life, ended all too soon, as it had done every year since Richard's conscription. At the start of 1944, Paula found herself once again taking care of patients, and also looking for a new home tutor for Georg. Emilia had started at the local grammar school the previous autumn, and Paula didn't want Georg to fall too far behind his twin sister. She hoped that the war would soon end, whatever the outcome, and that Georg would be able to go back to specialist tuition for deaf and dumb children and prepare properly for his end-of-school Abitur examinations. It pained her deeply to see how marginalized his deafness had left him, in spite of his obvious intelligence. Spring came, and Richard's letters from the front served to reassure her. There seemed to be no immediate danger, and even Fritz, after everything he'd been through, seemed to be coming to terms with his terrible loss, on the outside, at least. That was until one day in June when she returned to their lodgings after work, as usual, only to be met by a distraught Frau Heiroth. Frau Dr. Helmer, have you heard it all on the radio? What's on the radio? The English and the Americans have landed in Normandy. Isn't that exactly where your husband's stationed? Paula froze. Normandy's a big place. Where exactly have they landed? Somewhere near Cherbourg. Cherbourg. Fear gripped Paula's heart. Chapter 51. I cannot work in these conditions, roared Fritz as yet more plaster broke away from the ceiling and trickled onto his face. Gunfire had been thundering around them for hours, and now the explosions came nearer, making the walls shake. Fritz was tending a soldier with a gunshot wound to the upper arm, and the man groaned in pain in spite of the Procaine injection. Hasn't anyone told those idiots out there this is a field hospital? Do you really think that lot care? They've already bombed a whole city full of innocent civilians to smithereens, so why would they bother about a field hospital? Richard spoke with bitterness as he stood handing Fritz bandages. This was normally a job for the nurse, but most of them were busy preparing to evacuate all the wounded. You're right, silly question, said Fritz. Then he spoke to his patient. Right, all done. You were lucky the bullet went straight through without touching the bone. It'll heal well. Nurse Heidi, take this man to the transport. Are we clearing out already? Asked Richard. I thought we were supposed to hang on here until the afternoon. Can you do any decent work here? I can't. Fritz was in no doubt. If we want to get out of here at all, then we should try right now. Nurse Heidi, you're acting like a headless chicken. I've already told you to take this man to the medical vehicles outside. Oh God, we're all going to die. Heidi kept shouting the same thing. She was very young, 20 at the most by Richard's reckoning, and had probably been sent straight to the front after completing her training. She'd arrived in Cherbourg only 3 weeks ago. You're right there, said Fritz. It's just a question of when, and now will you just do as I asked? Sister Heidi was still running around, quite distraught, still saying, "We're all going to die." Fritz sighed and turned back to the patient he'd just finished tending. "Go down the corridor to the back, and you'll find the buses." The man nodded and did as he was told, even though he was still wobbly on his feet. Fritz took off his surgical apron and put on his uniform jacket and cap. "I think Nurse Heidi's problem falls within your area of expertise, Richard. Can you do anything for her?" Richard nodded and walked slowly towards her. The guns thundered again. There was a loud noise close by, and more plaster cascaded down from the ceiling. Sister Heidi fled the treatment room in sheer panic, but not to the rear entrance and the waiting transport, but to the main entrance. Richard went after her. "Nurse, come back here. You're running towards enemy fire." He caught up with her just as she reached the main entrance and grabbed hold of her. "Come with me, not out there." She stared back at him, her eyes dead. "We're all going to die. We're all going to die." "Not if you come with me, now." Richard had started to head back to the treatment room with her when she lost all control, turned on him like a woman possessed, punched him hard in the chest, and broke free. "Fritz, quickly, need you here," shouted Richard as he tried to block her path towards the firing line. "Coming," called Fritz, still buttoning up his jacket as he ran. Then a shell exploded, catching Richard in the belly and knocking him to the ground. "Oh God, we're all going to die!" Nurse Heidi kept up the same lament. "Shut your mouth once and for all," Fritz bellowed at her, then he knelt close to Richard. "Damn it, Richard." "I don't think it's much," said Richard, making light of his wound. He tried to touch the area where he'd been hit and felt something warm and wet in the place he expected only the cloth of his uniform to be. In disbelief, he gazed at the blood on his hand. "This can't be right. There's no pain." "That's because you're in shock. That'll soon change." Fritz tore away what remained of Richard's ripped jacket and shirt, took several rolls of bandage from his bag and pressed them against the wound. The pressure was uncomfortable, but there was still no pain. Was he imagining it, or were Fritz's hands really shaking? Richard felt that time was passing more slowly than usual, and the thunder of heavy artillery and the nurse's shrieks lost all meaning. He could see and hear, but his reason told him he should be doubling up with pain. But he felt nothing, neither pain nor fear. "Is it serious?" he asked Fritz. "I can only tell you that once I find out what internal injuries the shrapnel's caused." Fritz continued working on the bandaging. "What matters now is that you don't bleed to death." Nurse Heidi gave another piercing shriek, causing Richard to turn and look in her direction. An American soldier had come charging into the hospital, his gun at the ready. He saw the nurse and fired. Even against the background of shelling, Richard heard her body hit the ground, lifeless. Fritz whipped around, shouting in English, "This is a field hospital. We're not fighting troops." The American now aimed at Fritz. "We surrender." Fritz raised both his hands, still kneeling by his wounded friend. The American reloaded. "Didn't you hear? We surrender." Fritz was desperate, raising his hands even higher. Richard noticed the staring eyes of this young man, probably no older than the nurse he'd just shot dead. His gaze was blank. Richard knew the boy had lost his mind. Words wouldn't touch him. He hadn't taken in the fact that Fritz was surrendering. He slowly curved his finger around the trigger. The boy really was going to shoot Fritz. Richard's right hand slid swiftly to his belt, and before he realized what he was doing, he'd drawn and fired straight into the American's face. He fell backwards, but with his final movement, his index finger squeezed the trigger. The bullet missed Fritz by an inch, whisking off his cap. "My God," whispered Fritz, his voice trembling. "That one was ready to shoot us even though we'd surrendered. Why?" Richard was about to explain to Fritz that the staring eyes indicated the man had lost his mind, but before he could even begin, he felt pain so severe it took his breath away and left him gasping. With the greatest of care, Fritz took the pistol still clamped tightly in Richard's hand. "If I help you, can you stand up? We need to leave." He got hold of Richard and tried to pull him to his feet. Richard did all he could to cooperate, but the pain tore through him a second time. Can't do it, he gasped. Then I'll just carry you. It'll hurt, I'm warning you. Richard nodded dumbly. He couldn't even begin to imagine how this pain could possibly get any worse. Fritz lifted him a little higher, crouched again to brace himself, then heaved his friend over his shoulder. He was right. The pain did get worse. Richard chewed on his lip so as not to scream out loud as his own body weight pressed on the wound, while Fritz, panting with the exertion, carried him over his shoulder as he might a sack of potatoes all the way to the rear exit where help came at last. "We're the last out," grunted Fritz. "We've already seen one Yank. We have to get out of here." Richard almost passed out with the pain as they loaded him into the medical transport, but he waited in vain for the blessed relief of falling fully unconscious. Fritz climbed aboard and checked the emergency dressing. The fresh patch of blood did not fill him with confidence.
This is the end of disc number 8. Please insert disc number 9. This is disc number 9.
You must promise me one thing, Fritz. If I don't make it, don't tell Paula in a letter. Go and see her. Be there with her. I'm not letting you die. Never. It hurts like hell, moaned Richard. Can't you knock me out with EpiPen? Fritz nodded and reached inside his bag for the injection. I'll get you right, he promised, easing the needle into the crook of Richard's arm. If I fail, I'll tell Paula myself, but that's not going to happen. I'm not going to lose you to this damned war, not after losing Doro and the kids. Never. He pressed home the needle, and the last thing Richard saw before everything went black and the pain went away were the tears in his best friend's eyes. Chapter 52. Over the last 2 years, Göttingen had come to look more and more like a military hospital base. Surgical wards had been added to the existing psychiatric facility and were filled with wounded soldiers. Paula's responsibilities now included psychiatric counseling on these surgical wards, as the wounded so often developed psychoses or became suicidal following permanent disability. Paula's frequent deployment to these wards meant she swiftly got an understanding of where on the front the worst fighting was happening. Since the Allies had landed in Normandy, she had heard nothing from Richard. She tried to reassure herself with the knowledge that it was hard to maintain any communications at all in these difficult times, although the special German Reichsbahn train continued to run as before, ferrying the wounded out of France. Information was sparse, but one day she learned that one of the casualties on the ward had been wounded in Cherbourg. "Did you happen to meet my husband there?" she asked him, "Dr. Richard Helmer, or his friend Dr. Fritz Ellerweg?" "I don't know your husband, I'm afraid, but Dr. Ellerweg, yes, I know him. He operated on me. It's thanks to him I still have my leg." "So what was it like in Cherbourg?" "I don't want to scare you, but it was pretty horrific. We were as good as surrounded, and I'm lucky I got out in time. I've heard that the field hospital where I had my operation got heavily bombarded a couple of days after I left. Everyone had to be evacuated, but I only learned that secondhand, so I don't really know what happened." Days went by. More and more wounded arrived from the Western Front, but however many people Paula asked, nobody had news of Richard. Official reports about Cherbourg were restrained, indicating only that the men were fighting bravely. One Saturday morning in late June, Paula was sitting writing up her patient's notes when Sister Sybil came into her office. "Frau Dr. Helmer, you're asked to go immediately to the surgeon on 2B. It seems urgent." Paula set down her fountain pen. "And what exactly is so urgent? Is someone hallucinating or just another fit of crying caused by our hardened surgeons pushing someone to the limit?" Sister Sybil giggled. "I was only told that you're needed." Waiting for her at Ward 2B stood Dr. Derzen, a young surgeon who reminded her a little of Fritz. He was one of several who called for her only if it was really important. "We have a very difficult case here," he started to explain. "The moment he arrived here, he started insisting on seeing you." Paula frowned and said, "What are his symptoms?" "That's for you to establish. Best if you take a look at him. He'll tell you." He isn't behaving aggressively, is he? No, don't worry. Apart from the fact he persists in demanding a woman psychiatrist, he doesn't seem violent. You'll find him in the observation room, first bed by the window. Dr. Durzen grinned and Paula wavered. Surgeons sometimes had a very odd sense of humor, especially this one. When she walked into the observation room, she noticed nothing unusual. All the men seemed calm, most were asleep, a few were reading, 2 were playing cards. The man by the window pulled himself up when he saw her walk in. Paula froze in her tracks. "Richard!" Everyone turned to look. "Richard, you're here! You're alive!" She rushed to his bed, put her arms around him and kissed him, oblivious to the cheering and clapping going on around them. Richard held her close and returned her kisses. "I've been so worried about you," she cried once she'd let him go. "Are you badly wounded? Is it serious?" She took a moment to sit back and look at him closely. His face was pale. There were dark rings under his eyes and his cheeks were sunken, as if he'd lost weight. "Everything seems better now," he replied. "I'm home, and I'm staying." He reached in the bedside cupboard for a sealed envelope. "Keep this safe. Fritz gave it to me," he whispered to her. "There are 2 operative reports. One's the official one, and Dr. Durzen's got that. And one's the real one. That's what you've now got." Paula put the envelope out of sight in her uniform pocket. "I don't understand." "Sit down here on the bed and I'll tell you." And so Richard told her how he'd been badly wounded, how they'd almost been shot by the crazed American, and how Fritz had brought him to safety behind their own lines. "But I don't really remember everything, as good old Fritz gave me a hefty dose of Evipan. By the time I came around, he'd operated on me and arranged my transport home. When he said goodbye, he told me he'd hugely exaggerated in the official report. He reckons anyone who reads it will think I've been practically disemboweled and am not fit for further service at the front." The trace of a tired smile played around his mouth. "What I really had was a few bits of shrapnel in my belly and 2 in my liver. I was lucky it all just missed the abdominal aorta." "Thank God it did. When can you come home?" "If everything carries on healing well, in a couple of days, that's all. Fritz stuffed me full of sulfonamides too, to be on the safe side. I can't tell you how sick they make me feel, but he said that's no bad thing because I mustn't eat too much until my belly's healed up." Paula laughed. "That's typical of Fritz. So where is he now?" "Don't know. The last I saw of him was when he arranged to get me to the railway station." Richard took a deep breath. Paula could see how tiring it had been to say all this, in spite of his forced good cheer. "Oh, something else," he added. "You'll need to get me some clothes from somewhere. We had to get out of there so fast that we left everything, and the uniform I had on at the time, well, it's not usable apart from the boots." There was another sigh. "I couldn't even save my Laika." "But you're safe. That's the important thing. Nothing else matters." "I'm still cross about the Laika. That means you're getting better." He gave her a smile. "Yes, that's the end of my war at the front. That's all that matters." Chapter 53. Richard made a slow but sure recovery from his war wounds. Paula was careful to secure from the chief medical officer documentation confirming that Richard was permanently unfit for service as a result of his injuries. On the one hand, Richard could now enjoy being with his family again and sharing in the lives of his children, but on the other, he soon became all too familiar with the uncertainty suffered by Paula over the last 3 years. He sent a number of letters to Fritz at the front but got no replies. Was Fritz not receiving the letters, or had they all gone missing? Had his friend ended up as a prisoner of war? Had he fallen? No, he couldn't countenance that, but ever since he'd shot the American in self-defense, it had been clear to him that neither the medical corps nor unconditional surrender could effectively protect Fritz from the worst. Gruesome images plagued Richard's mind. Never the image of the soldier he'd shot in the head, only that of Fritz kneeling helplessly on the ground, his hands up in surrender. Fritz, who'd have been shot dead if Richard hadn't fired first. And Richard had other people to worry about besides. He often thought of his family in Hamburg and of Paula's father. His father-in-law still had a telephone that worked, but the connection was becoming more unreliable by the day, so Richard decided to go to Hamburg to see the situation there for himself. It was now the end of August, and Paula wasn't sure what to do, as Emilia and Georg wanted to accompany their father. She allowed herself to be persuaded that the trip would not be too dangerous. Since the terrible raids of the previous summer, the city had been largely reduced to ruins and was no longer an attractive target for the Allied bombers. For a while now, they had concentrated all their attention on hitherto undisturbed German cities, meaning that Paula had become so busy in the hospital that it was hard to take time off to go to Hamburg with the others. That's the price you pay for realizing your dream of becoming a psychiatrist while I've been at home seeing to the children, Richard teased her. When you come back, I'm going to ask Professor Ewald if he can find you a post. If you're fit enough to go to Hamburg, you're fit enough to work. You'll make me think you begrudge me my period of convalescence. Do you want to ask him if I could take over your job so you can be at home again? Definitely not. But I do think it would do you good to have a routine again. I'll ask him myself once we're back. Paula, I love you, even though you sound like a nagging washerwoman at the moment. Washerwoman? That's it. That's what you've forgotten to do. You haven't collected our dry cleaning. Seeing as you're the one at home all day, you might have thought of picking that up. I'll just have to do it myself tomorrow. Oh, Paula, be nice to me again. I'll do better, I promise. I'll collect the laundry first thing tomorrow before I go to the station. He pulled her gently towards him, and she nestled into him like she used to. And then you'll miss your train, so no, you won't do that. I'll do it. It's okay. The main thing is that you and the children come home safely. You can't get rid of us that easily, he said, kissing her. We're so clingy, we'll keep coming back. The trains were still surprisingly reliable. In spite of the damage to the infrastructure caused by the bombing raids, they found seats easily as hardly anyone went in the direction of Hamburg these days, while all the trains coming from the other direction were packed. At Hanover, Emilia noticed a cattle truck in a siding. People were calling out for water and trying to push their hands through ventilation slits covered in barbed wire. Papa, why are there people in that wagon, and why is there barbed wire? Richard took a look out of the window with her. I don't know, Poppet. Perhaps they're prisoners of war, said Georg sagely. But there are women's voices, too, Emilia explained to him. They're shouting in German. I really don't know, Poppet, said Richard again. He tried to think of some plausible explanation but couldn't come up with anything. As far as he knew, the Nazis always shipped off their political opponents to the nearest concentration camp, and the sick and feeble-minded were collected from institutions by bus. At Hanover there was a change of crew on the train. When the woman came to check their tickets, Richard asked her outright about the cattle truck. I don't know what kind of people are in there, she said, clipping their tickets. I just know the truck's supposed to be going to Poland. Why's it got that barbed wire? Asked Emilia. Probably so they don't throw stuff out during the journey, replied the conductor. Everyone knows how mucky the Poles are. But they're asking for water in German. Nobody would understand if they did it in Polish. I wish you a pleasant onward journey to Hamburg, she said before leaving their compartment. Papa, what's happening, do you think? Giving a light shrug of the shoulders, Richard said, Maybe they're Polish people who were working here and are being taken home because so much has been flattened. The train arrived in Hamburg 2 hours later. As they crossed the Elbe, they saw bombed and burnt-out buildings with only the outside walls still standing. Huge mounds of rubble made many streets impassable. Emilia and Georg stared through the train window in disbelief. The destruction was the same across the whole of the city. Everything's in ruins. There isn't a single house left. Emilia was appalled. Grandpa Wilhelm's house is still standing, said Richard. But Grandpa Hans Kurtz's workshop isn't, is it? And what about our car? Asked Georg. The wars destroyed all that. As their train rolled into Hamburg main station, they realized that its glass canopy had suffered too. But it was astonishing how much activity still went on in this otherwise ruined city. Let's see if the elevated railway's still working, Richard said to the children. Then they heard a woman's voice calling out, Dr. Helmer? Is it really you? Richard turned to find a middle-aged strawberry blonde with freckles, now a little faded by the years. Do we know each other? He was puzzled at the interruption. Yes, but from a long way back. It's Georg I recognize. Richard glanced down at his son, who appeared equally baffled. Sister Elfrida, you used to collect your wife from the hospital by car, and Georg was in the children's hospital with diphtheria. Georg broke into a smile as the memory of this nurse came back to him. Richard, too. You recruited us to the People's Welfare before the Nazis took it over. That's right. A lot's happened since then, she sighed. But bumping into you here today, it's a godsend. Really? Sister Elfrida nodded. Can you make time tomorrow to come to Langenhorn? It's to do with Dr. Kruger. There is nobody there I can trust with what I've found out, and it's too monstrous for me to keep to myself. Do come, please. When? 3 o'clock tomorrow in front of the church. I'll be there. Chapter 54. It felt strange to step inside his father-in-law's home for the first time in 3 years. The entrance hall with its coat cupboard looked just the same as in 1926, when he had collected Paula for the first time. The front room had hardly changed either. Richard, you're here. This is wonderful. His mother was the first to greet him, hugging him as if he were still a little boy. Then it was his father's turn to rejoice in their son's arrival with an enthusiastic embrace. His father-in-law greeted him with a warm handshake and an affectionate pat on the shoulder, reserving his hugs for the grandchildren. Dear Frau Koch welcomed him with a smile, while gently scolding him for not bringing Paula with him. That's what it's like when the lady of the house earns all the money. Work comes first, Richard said with a grin. Jokes aside, she'd have loved to come, but they can't manage without her at the hospital at the moment, so I thought I'd use a little of my convalescence period when no one is expecting anything of me to come and see you all. We've been so worried about you, his father confessed. Are you better yet, my boy? Absolutely, Papa. With Fritz in charge, you're safe as houses. He's the best surgeon I know. His mother gestured him towards the table. Look, to celebrate we've baked apple cake with apples from the allotment. They all took their places around the table and Richard's mother cut the cake. Not too big a slice for me, thank you. Just half of that one. But you need to get your strength back. You're right, but that's why half is enough. My belly is still recovering from all the shrapnel. But it'll recover fully, won't it? You bet. I'll be tucking in again by Christmas. He beamed at his mother, but then quickly changed the subject. It looks as though you've got everything well set up here. Do you still have the same consulting room at the end of the hallway? Yes, replied his father-in-law. You have to make use of whatever you've got. Paula's decision to marry into the family of a master carpenter gives us a great advantage, even though I've had to sacrifice my biggest and best living room cupboard for your father's inventions. What do you mean? It's still there. Wilhelm and Hans Kurt chuckled. Yes, but it's not a cupboard anymore. Richard's father got up and went over to it. Look. He released 2 hooks that were barely noticeable, then pulled down the door from the top. It opened out into a large double bed. Books might be able to rest on a shelf, but people can't. I got hold of a slatted wooden frame to put the mattresses on. The cupboard door's only there for show. You can sleep just as well in that bed as in any. This is how we're keeping our heads above water. Our workshop may have been destroyed, but our ideas march on. Holger's lads can do this kind of work in the customer's home, direct to order. Our capital was always our creativity. Yes, the workshop's gone, but we still own our piece of woodland. When Carl eventually comes home from the war, we'll rebuild and go for specialization in the kind of space-saving furniture that people will need. We're already trying out kitchen benches and tables that anyone can transform into a bed in a few nifty moves. That's ingenious. Richard leapt up in excitement and went to look more closely at the bed. The linen was held down by straps so that it didn't slide off when the bed was folded back up. Could you make a bed like that for Paula and me? Yes, but I don't know how we'd get it to Göttingen. I'm not thinking of there. The war can't possibly go on forever, and when it's over, we'd like to come back to Hamburg. There's no suitable school for Georg in Göttingen. So why wait until after the war? There's room for everyone here, said Paula's father. With the Nazis still in power and people like Kruger acting as informants, it's still dangerous for Georg. But it might just be that fate has dealt me a card to use against Kruger. He told them about his appointment with Sister Elfriede. If you need any support in sticking something on that swine of a man, I'm right with you. His father-in-law was in no doubt. I know how to do it. The last time it took him weeks to shake off the suspicion that he'd been selling medicines on the black market. It was most unfortunate that he fell on his feet again and wormed his way into a senior post in the children's department at Longenhorn. I want to see that man brought down for all the suffering he's caused. I'll do my best, Richard promised. The following day at 3 o'clock, Sister Elfriede stood waiting for him outside the church on the grounds of Longenhorn. It had taken him an age to get there by tram, as there were problems with the network, and he had to keep changing and finding alternative routes. He was amazed that any public transport was working at all in these circumstances, let alone as punctually as it was. But everything he saw from the window was painful for him and stirred memories of the old days in the late 1920s and early 1930s when he had regularly driven this route, and when the asylum at Longenhorn cared about patient welfare and people like Kruger had a rough ride. "I'm so pleased you're here," said Sister Elfriede. "Let's sit inside the church where no one will disturb us." Richard followed her in and sat down next to her. "So, what's this all about?" Sister Elfriede took something from her pinafore pocket. It was a list of names and dates of birth. After the bombing at Rotenbergsort and the transfer of most of the children to this place, Dr. Kruger managed eventually to get himself put in charge of the children's department, and after some toing and froing became medical director. Sister Elfriede paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and then carried on. "During this time, he has killed at least 22 children by lethal injection, dissected 6 of them for research purposes, and sent their brains to the Neuroanatomical Institute at Eppendorf. This list gives you the names, dates of birth, and file numbers of the children concerned." He murdered children and dissected them? Richard struggled to take this in. Even Kruger couldn't have sunk to this level, surely. "Yes, that's what he did," said Sister Elfriede. "It's so truly monstrous that it is hard to believe. I've already tried to get at the files in the archive, but it's difficult. The archivist is vigilant, and if there's nothing to occupy her elsewhere, it's impossible to take the right files without her noticing. I'd like you to distract her while I get hold of 1 or 2 files as evidence. My fear is that these documents will have disappeared by the end of the war, and there'll be no proof that the children on this list really were murdered. Will you help me?" "Definitely. Is it still Frau Unterweger in the archive? She knows me from before." "No, she died in the firestorm." Sister Elfriede lowered her eyes for a moment. "It's Frau Rotting now, and she was appointed 2 years ago. She's very conscientious and a dyed-in-the-wool Nazi at that." "Charming. I know how to deal with people like her." The archive was lodged in an unobtrusive little building between the pavilions that used to be open houses. The children's facility had been added during the intervening years. Richard wondered if the secure unit was the same and whether Kurt Hansen still worked there. He'd have loved to have seen his old colleague again, but the risk of running straight into one of Kruger's informants was too great. Richard let Sister Elfriede go into the little building first, then waited a short time before knocking at the door. He heard steps approaching as if up a short flight of stairs, then the door opened. "Yes, what can I do for you?" "Forgive me for knocking like this, but I'm trying to find house 27C. "Are you sure you have the right number? There's no 27C here." "Isn't there? Oh dear. Nothing similar then? I've been told my son's in there. He's just turned 12. "For what reason is your son in hospital?" "Ah!" Richard let out a sudden groan of pain, his hand flying to the old wound. "Are you all right?" "I'm so sorry," gasped Richard, noticing that his little performance was having the desired effect. "A shell got me a couple of months back, in Cherbourg." He took several deep breaths. "There, it's passing already." "Do you want to sit down for a moment?" "Oh yes, please, that's most kind of you." She ushered him into the building and to her office, directing him to the only chair in the room. Shall I bring you a glass of water? I don't want to put you to any trouble, replied Richard, letting out a convincing groan. That's no trouble at all. Think nothing of it, one moment. And the archivist left the room. Richard looked around. Opposite him, the door to the basement stood open. This was where the files of deceased or simply discharged patients were stored. He wondered whether Sister Elfrida had already found what she needed. Frau Rotting came back with the glass of water. Thank you. Richard sipped at it appreciatively. And what has your son been diagnosed with? Diphtheria. I only got back to Hamburg last night. Before that, I was in the field hospital at Göttingen, you see. My wife told me about Ludwig being in hospital and it not looking so good for him, so I had to come here straight away. I couldn't bear it if he died without my seeing him. In the last 3 years, I've only had a few days with him on home leave. He wiped his eyes with deliberate discretion, something which didn't go unnoticed. I'm so sorry. If your son has diphtheria, then he'll be in the infection ward. They heard footsteps coming up the stairs from the basement. It was Sister Elfrida. Did you manage to find the files yourself? Asked Frau Rotting. I had to look after this gentleman. Yes, I've got everything. Thank you, Frau Rotting. Frau Rotting checked the numbers of the files that Sister Elfrida held quite openly and entered their details in the file loan book. Are you going straight back on the ward? Yes. Then you could take this gentleman with you, if you wouldn't mind. He says his son is being treated here for diphtheria, and I know he'll need help in finding the infection ward. Of course. Do come with me. I'll show you the way. Richard put his glass down on the desk and got up with exaggerated care. Many thanks. You're both too kind. We must all stick together at times like this, said Frau Rotting. My very best wishes to you and your family. Tell me how you managed to wrap her around that little finger of yours, said Sister Elfrida once they were out of earshot. Tales of wounded German war heroes whose children are at death's door. That does the trick with any of our national comrades, he said with a smile. So, have you really got everything? Yes, 2 files in a linen bag hidden under my pinafore. These here are the ones I was actually meant to collect. If anyone notices that the other 2 are missing, they'll never think it's anything to do with us. Sister Elfrida slid out the bag and handed it to Richard. Take good care of it. Maybe I can't stop anything from happening, but at least I can make sure these crimes don't go unpunished. Sister Elfrida, thank you. You're very brave. I won't let you down. Once back at his father-in-law's home, he studied the documents more closely. They were the records of a 3-year-old girl with severe epilepsy and a baby boy with hydrocephaly. Both children had been murdered by injection of luminol and then dissected. The dissection report was in Kruger's handwriting. Richard passed on the files and the list of names of the other murdered children to his father-in-law. Please take good care of this, Richard said to him. This provides us with the evidence that Kruger's a murderer. One day we'll hold him to account. Part 3. 0 Hour. Chapter 55. On returning to Göttingen, Richard kept his word and applied for a post in psychiatry. Professor Ewald took him on immediately. It was a new experience for Richard to be working alongside his wife, and for her to be his point of referral on the workings of the department. At times he caught himself thinking of staying long-term in Göttingen because he loved the work at the asylum. Living at the home of the melancholic Frau Heiroth, however, was growing increasingly tiring. She even burst into Richard and Paula's bedroom one night when she had one of her turns, as she liked to call them. When she refused to give them the key, Richard fitted a bolt to the inside of the door, something that led to weeks of tension. At the end of November, Frau Heiroth threatened to give them notice, so Richard and Paula made the decision for her. In December, they and the twins returned to Hamburg so that Richard and Paula could take over her 70-year-old father's practice. Professor Ewald was sorry to lose such expertise and, on Paula's departure, gave her an outstanding reference which confirmed her standing as a consultant in psychiatry. Karl turned up unexpectedly just before Christmas, accompanied by a pregnant French girl, who he introduced to the family as his wife, Julie. She was a dainty, pretty young woman with curly brown hair and green eyes. When Paris fell in August, we had no choice but to disappear, Karl explained. You wouldn't believe what women go through if they've had a relationship with a German. They'd never have forgiven Julie for having my child, and I couldn't possibly have left her behind. So you're a deserter? Holger was shocked. You know that carries the death penalty. You don't need to worry about that, Papa, Karl said with a grin. After all, I worked in administration, and as a good German, I know that you're nothing without your papers. So before we left, I made sure I got a hold of a blank military discharge form. He fished out the document and held it out for his father to see. I managed to get a marriage certificate the same way, as we'd never have been given permission to tie the knot. This document shows that Julie is my wife. It's so authentic that even Hitler himself wouldn't query it. And what does her family say about her going off with you like this? They as good as drove me to it, to be honest, she replied in virtually accentless German. They can't forgive me for falling in love with Karl and just called me a whore. Julie was working with us as an interpreter, Karl explained. One thing led to another. If there's one good thing to come out of this damned war, it's that Julie and I found each other. Still aghast, Holger stared at his son, but Richard started laughing. Karl, you're one of us, that's for sure. That idea with the discharge form and the marriage certificate, well done. He gave Karl an appreciative clap on the shoulder and turned to Julie. Welcome to Hamburg, Julie, and to the family. My only worry is how to put you both up here. If that's the only problem, there's space for Karl and Julie at the allotment, said Holger. We're in the process of extending the cabin in any case. There are plenty of bricks lying around in the rubble, and we've got enough to build one more room. Julie, please don't be offended if I sounded a bit skeptical. You are, of course, most warmly welcome. I was just worried how we'd get you any food coupons if you're living in hiding. Papa, that shouldn't be too much of a problem with these papers. Christmas was a bright spot in otherwise dark times, thanks to the family being reunited. Only the continuing absence of Fritz cast a shadow. During the next few weeks, Richard made regular visits to the Red Cross offices to try to find out where his closest friend might be. But among the thousands of German soldiers who had died or landed in prisoner-of-war camps, he found no mention of Fritz. Then, on April 30th, 1945, news of Hitler's death in the battle for Berlin was broadcast on the radio. While of the highest significance in global terms, for the family, the most important news that day was that Karl and Julie now had a healthy daughter, christened Marie. British occupying forces reached Hamburg on May 3rd. At first, everything was chaotic and nobody was sure what was going to happen. On the first day, there was a total curfew, leaving Richard's mother and Frau Koch wondering how long they could last with their limited food supplies. Fortunately, the curfew was eased the next day, and thereafter had to be observed only between 9 at night and 6 in the morning. The British seized flats in the best areas, and it was forbidden for German nationals and British soldiers to speak to one another. Anyone with a request to make of an official body had to do so in English. Anything put forward in German was simply ignored. They're treating us like they treat the natives in their colonies, grumbled Paula's father. They see us as second-class citizens. Did you expect anything different? Asked Richard. Just remember how they targeted residential areas in the bombings so they could kill as many of us as possible. There was I thinking things would slowly get better once the war ended, his father-in-law said with a sigh. I'd hoped you'd have been able to use what you know about Kruger against him by now. What makes you think that? Do you really believe the British are going to be interested in the murder of 22 German children when they've killed thousands with their own bombs? When new food coupons were handed out, Richard was shocked and lost all hope that an occupying power would have any interest in crimes committed by German doctors, given its obvious lack of interest in the starving population. Rations were so small they did nothing more than delay death. His parents, Frau Koch and his father-in-law, who, as pensioners, no longer did productive work, were expected to manage on a mere 900 calories a day, as were children. As practicing doctors, he and Paula were allocated 1,500 calories a day. How are we supposed to manage on this? Asked his mother. I know we can ask Margit and Holger to put something by from the allotment, but that'll never be enough, and what on earth will we do in the winter?" "We're getting a monthly cigarette quota, 60 for all of us," said Richard. "I've heard from patients that you can get a loaf of bread for 3 cigarettes on the black market in Talstrasse." "Trading on the black market can put you in prison," commented Paula. "If you were arrested, we'd be in an even worse position than we are now." "I'm willing to try it," announced Frau Koch. "If I get caught, our little community won't lose very much because my food ration's already small. I'll do the usual 14 days in prison, and that won't do me any harm." Nobody came up with any objections, and so Frau Koch became an expert in black market trading. The amount she brought home each day was still not enough to live on, but it did at least help to keep starvation at bay. Holger established a link with farmers in the Fairlande district of Hamburg who worked the land not so far from the family's allotment, offering them his son's carpentry services in exchange for food. The lads did have to watch out on their way home from these trips, as the British carried out regular checks. Any excursion undertaken with the express purpose of stockpiling was forbidden. Anyone caught hoarding food not only had their supplies confiscated, but was also sent to prison. The ban on fraternization between the British and the Germans relaxed just a few weeks later, however, largely because most of the British weren't sticking to it. There was a big difference between the ordinary soldiers and the rather pompous officers who thought they were a cut above. Survival was at the forefront of everybody's mind, but Richard still nurtured the hope that the time would soon come for him to present the evidence of child murder, particularly as Kruger still held a very senior role, and Richard could imagine him holding back his patients' rations so as not to want for anything himself in such hard times. So, at the beginning of July, he packed the incriminating material in his briefcase and went off to approach the British military administration. Even though he spoke good English, the British officials who Richard first came up against could do nothing for him and sent him off to a variety of different people. Eventually, he found himself opposite a tall, lean British officer called McNeil. Richard sensed immediately that this too was going nowhere, and wondered if being dispatched from one unhelpful place to the next was an example of the famous British sense of humor. He presented his case regardless. "Are these children German nationals, or children of those who have taken part in the war?" asked McNeil, who looked to Richard exactly the type of British officer to have thrashed Indian coolies with his stick. "They are German children." The expression on the man's face told him this was the wrong answer. "They are not our responsibility." "Then please tell me who is responsible for pursuing doctors who have committed crimes against innocent children. The German police now have no authority, and the doctor guilty of these crimes is still sitting in the Langenhorn General Hospital as its medical director." "I'm sorry, but we're not responsible for them." "Do you mean that your department is not responsible for them? Or do you mean that the British occupying forces have no interest in solving crimes committed by Nazi doctors if the victims aren't of the right nationality?" McNeil gave a snort of disdain. "How many of your countrymen do you suppose have come here in the last few weeks to ingratiate themselves with me as informants? I have no intention of ingratiating myself. I want to report a crime and have the proof." He held up his briefcase with one hand and pointed at it with the other. "In here are the files of 2 of the murdered children. These files leave no doubt that these are cases of outright murder. Do you have any idea what has been happening in this place for the last 12 years? The mentally ill and disabled have been separated out and murdered, even children. You can't sweep that under the carpet." A cynical smile flickered across the Englishman's face. "Well, well, and you're the one who wants to right the wrong, Herr Dr. Helmer." It was clear from the way McNeil articulated the German words Herr Doktor in his otherwise purely English question that he viewed the German in front of him with great disdain. "And I'm sure you're going to tell me that you were never a member of the Nazi Party and never voted for Hitler, isn't that so? Perhaps you'll also tell me that fairy tale about how you risked your own life to save others from tyranny. Oh yes, I've met countless other informants like you in the last few weeks, all of whom want to reveal some crime or other. It's all turned out to be an excuse to curry favor with us, but that doesn't wash with me. I know exactly how to deal with your sort. First, you carry on as if you rule the world. Then, when you're knocked down, you say it wasn't anything to do with you and come creeping in for favors. I have no interest in the information you bring and see cowardly informants like you as contemptible. Get out of my office. Without a word, Richard did what he was told. It was pointless. No one would ever bring these people to justice. People like Kruger would always fall on their feet. His crimes were of no interest to these new rulers. He'd suspected this for some time. It was true what his father-in-law had said soon after the occupation had started. Anyone killing innocent civilians through carpet bombing, anyone keeping food rations so low that even small children were starving to death, would not be interested in the murders of 22 German children. And if, by some miracle, they did take an interest, it would have nothing to do with compassion for the children and everything to do with keeping the moral high ground. If the German barbarians were ready to get rid of their own kind, it saved them the work. Blinded by rage, Richard charged out into the corridor and collided with another British officer. "I beg your pardon," he muttered without looking at the man and hurried on. The man shouted something after him, but Richard ignored him and quickened his pace. He couldn't take any more humiliation. Chapter 56. By the time he had spent the whole morning trying in vain to get a hearing, only to end up on the receiving end of the occupier's disdain in the form of McNeil, Richard was in no mood to go home, where he'd have to admit his failure. Instead, he wandered aimlessly through the ruins of his city and, after about 3 hours of this, found himself standing on the site of the family workshop. Nothing was left. Nothing. Only a huge pile of rubble. He attempted to make out familiar bits of the building in the pile, and memories of the old days crept back to him. Of his brother, Georg, teaching him how to ride a bike in the yard. Of himself and Georg feeding the horses before the family owned a modern delivery vehicle, their old Opel Tree Frog. The horses' stalls had later been converted to make extra workshop space and a garage. Richard knew that his own car, or what was left of it, must still be in there somewhere. As he was reminiscing, he saw something protruding from the rubble, a small piece of white tin. Crouching down, he pulled at it and found himself holding a battered number plate, HH-18208, the front plate from their own car. Yet more memories came flooding back. The day he married Paula, the most magnificent present the family could have given them. Leonie had still been there then. Fritz and Dorothea, full of dreams of a happy future life together. This number plate had crossed Alpine passes, proudly carried dust thrown up by Italian roads, and now it was part of the life he'd lost long ago, the life now visible only in the photo albums they'd saved. Drained of all strength, he found a remnant of wall big enough to sit on. His customary optimism was at the lowest possible ebb. Whatever confidence and faith he'd had in finding justice had just been wiped out by McNeil. How was he to protect his children from starvation on these meager rations? What would happen in the winter? Each time he'd thought things couldn't get any worse, fate had dealt him yet another blow. Each time he'd believed that life would take a turn for the better, it had immediately got worse. Fritz had already experienced that to the full, with his whole family dead and his own status now uncertain. But at least he wouldn't have to watch his children die of starvation. To die in the firestorm was horrific, but at least it was quick. From his wallet, he took the treasured old photo of him and Fritz, both in uniform with their families, which he had carried with him like a talisman. But the curse had been fulfilled. Family photos with men in uniform bring bad luck. This time, death had struck those left behind. Henrietta and Hari looked so happy. Hari was holding Rudy, their little dachshund, and resting his cheek against the dog's fur. Next to him stood Emilia and Georg, not knowing then how it felt to be hungry. He felt the tears welling up and couldn't fight them back. Maybe it wasn't manly to cry, but what did that matter now? Any old sense of honor was dead. Everything he had ever believed in was dead. And if life continued in this vein, his children would soon be dead too. Something touched his shoulder and startled him. He whipped around. "Margit, what are you doing here?" She sat down next to him on his bit of wall. "I come here pretty much every day, just to look for stuff we might be able to use. That's how we got back a few of our tools. And you? What's happened?" "Look at this. That's what's happened." He gestured at the decimation all around them, then wiped his eyes. "It can't be just that to upset you so much. What's really the matter?" Then she noticed the photo in his hand. "Is it bad news about Fritz?" "No, there's no news about him." "Then you must go on looking for him, Richard. Have you been to the Red Cross today to search the latest lists?" "No, I went to see the British." "Why did you bother going to see those arrogant Tommies?" He told her about his futile attempts to seek justice. "So that's why you're so down." Margit put her arm around him. "But you'll bounce back. He's nothing more than a stupid, arrogant Brit with no idea what's been happening here, and without even a quarter of the courage you've shown over the last 12 years. What was it you always said to Papa? The Helmers are carved from mahogany, stable, noble, and strong. We rebuilt our lives after the First War, Richard. We can do it again this time round." "You do realize everything's destroyed?" "Oh well, it'll just take longer to get cleared up, but it doesn't alter the fact that we can do it." "Margit, where do you get your strength from? You've lost so much more than I have. You've lost a son, and I have 4 other children I need to be there for, and a granddaughter now. Life goes on, Richard. The good days will come back sometime, but not on their own. We've got to work for it. Moaning and groaning never got anyone anywhere." She let go of him and got to her feet. "And work for it is what I'm going to do. Let's see what I can find today. So stop sniveling and go and search for Fritz. If you don't look for him, you'll never find him." "Thanks, Margit. I needed a pep talk. That's what big sisters are there for, even when they're grandmas." She smiled at him affectionately. Richard put the photograph back in his wallet, then picked up the number plate and stowed it away next to the files in his briefcase. Although he was still exhausted and hadn't eaten all day, Margit's advice gave him fresh impetus and he went off to the nearest Red Cross post. Masses of new names were on the lists pinned up on the walls there. He looked immediately for an Ellerweg but found only an Ellerweg. First name, Hari. Hari? He looked at the date of birth and his heart missed a beat. February 8th, 1937. The same date of birth as Fritz's son. But Hari was dead. And why was a child on the prisoner of war list? Then he realized he was looking at the wrong one. This was a list of orphans looking for surviving relatives. Hari Ellerweg, who had the same date of birth as Fritz's son, was in an orphanage on Averhofstrasse. Chapter 57. Soon after 7 that evening, Richard arrived home with Hari. Paula rushed to open the door. "Where on earth have you been? We've been beside ourselves with worry." Her voice petered out when she saw Hari holding Richard's hand. "This little boy, he looks like—" "Hari?" Her hand flew to her open mouth. "It can't be." "It's him, Paula. It's Hari, Fritz's son. It's a miracle, but he survived." Paula was lost for words and just stood there in the doorway staring at Hari. "Can we come in now?" asked Richard. Paula seemed to give herself a little shake before standing back to let them through. "Hari, is that really you? I'm so happy you're alive. You're really here." She made as if to hug him, but noticed how he shrank away from her, so held back, just as she had learned during her pediatric training. "Hari, let's bring you in properly." Then she turned to Richard and whispered, "You've got a visitor. A British officer has been here for 2 hours and insists on seeing you. He's in the waiting room." "A British officer? They wouldn't usually come to a German home like this. Unless, of course, they want to seize it." His voice was bitter. "But I'm sure ours isn't smart enough for them. What does he want from me?" "He wouldn't say. Did you say or do something this morning? Something that would cause a problem? No, I managed to stay civil and bite my tongue. No one was interested in children having been murdered. I was told in no uncertain terms that if it's only about German children, then it's not their responsibility. Oh, was all Paula could muster by way of reply. Richard turned back to Hari. Will you go with Aunt Paula now and say hello to Amelia and Georg? Can't I stay with you, Uncle Richard? Hari clung to his hand, gazing up at him beseechingly. In the boy's eyes, Richard saw both a fear of abandonment and the heart-rending need for someone to cling to. He found himself wondering yet again what Hari had had to endure. Of course you can, Hari. Let's go and take a look at this Englishman who wants to speak to me. Richard, is that wise? Asked Paula. Yes, Richard responded as he went off to the waiting room, Hari at his side. Their visitor had been reading an English newspaper but folded it away as Richard opened the door into the waiting room. Good evening, Richard, he said in German. This annoyed Richard straight away. He couldn't understand why this man was using his first name, even if he did look vaguely familiar. Laika II and an Egyptian tomb. Ring any bells? The Englishman said, smiling broadly. Arthur Grifford! So you do recognize me. Arthur got up and held out his hand to Richard. You nearly ran me down this morning. Richard put his briefcase on the table and shook Arthur by the hand. That was you? That's right. Arthur smiled again. And who is this young man here? This is Hari, Fritz's lad. We all thought he'd perished with his mother and sister in the bombing in 43, and then today of all days I happened to find him in an orphanage. It's a miracle. Arthur's smile vanished when he saw the expression on Hari's face and in his eyes. I'd rather we talked in a proper room, said Richard, but our consulting room closes at 7 and then gets turned into a bedroom. 8 of us live in this place. No, with Hari, that makes 9. This waiting room is fine, Arthur commented, sitting down again, only without the usual reading matter. Yes, we had a good supplier, but that all fell apart at the end of the war. Richard took a seat opposite their visitor, with Hari at his side, still holding tight to his hand. I'd appreciate it if you could make this fairly brief so I can spend time with Hari afterwards. He hasn't seen a familiar face for 2 years, and I just want to be here for him. Arthur nodded. I quite understand. He took a deep breath before starting to explain why he was there. After you'd gone charging past me this morning with a face like thunder, I asked McNeil what was going on. When he filled me in on your conversation, I pointed out to him that there probably was something in your story, all the more so because as early as the end of May I'd heard of similar incidents at the Children's Hospital in Rotenburgsort. We're carrying out an investigation into the senior consultant there, a Dr. Bayer, although it's admittedly more because he was a member of the stormtroopers. McNeil told me you're not responsible for German children. It's not that simple. At the moment, everything here is still developing and informants have indeed been streaming in to see McNeil. But after everything you told me back in 42, it's clear to me that you've got evidence, and that's what I'm interested in. Will you show it to me? Richard reached for his briefcase. The number plate lay diagonally against the files inside. He took it out, placed it on the table, and then removed the files. Meanwhile, Arthur had picked up the plate and was looking at it. Is this part of the evidence? No, it's my old number plate. And why are you carrying it around in your briefcase? Because I came across it today in the rubble where our old workshop used to be. Call me sentimental. Paula and I were given the car as our wedding present from the family and set off for Italy in it on the first day of our marriage. He handed Arthur the files, but the Englishman only said, Did you carry on with the photography? Yes, with a box camera. Still got the Leica? Do you want to look at these medical files or talk about photography? Hari suddenly spoke up. Uncle Richard, have you still got pictures of Mama and Papa and Henrietta and Rudy? Yes. Lots. We'll have a good look at them afterwards. Have a good look at them together now if you'd like. I'll need time to read these files. This isn't the right time. Why not? Arthur and Hari spoke as if with one voice. Richard couldn't think of a good enough reason, so he picked 2 albums, one from 1939 and one from 1940. First of all, he showed Hari the earlier photos of their last visit together to the beach at Travemünde. See, there's Mama, there's Henrietta with your papa, and there's Rudy burrowing in the sand. Hari started to cry. Everything's going to be all right. Richard put his arms around Hari again to comfort him as best he could. Arthur looked up from the files and gazed at Hari with the greatest sympathy. "It's all my fault," wept Hari, "'cause I didn't hold on tight to Rudy." Then it all poured out, all the anguish of the last 2 years and the story of how he'd survived when his mother and sister hadn't. He told Richard how they had rushed to their air raid shelter in the cellar on the first day of the terrible firestorm, but Rudy had kept whining, refusing to go down there, and then had broken free. Hari had run after the dog, not hearing his mother beseeching him to come back, and suddenly found himself out on the street without the others. He was immediately caught in the stream of people fleeing the danger, and they swept him along with them. Rudy was nowhere to be seen, and the panicked crowd moved swiftly as the bombs rained down on the city and homes went up in flames. An elderly woman had seized Hari by the hand and pulled him along with her, the boy still shouting, "Rudy! Rudy!" But then she had jumped with him into the River Elbe, where they and lots of others had clung to a boat while their world was consumed by the fire. Hari's recollections of the following days were hazy. At some point he was picked up and taken to the orphanage. He gave his name, but they heard it as Ellervig, not Ellervaig. Hari couldn't yet read and only knew his father's first name, not his full date of birth, so his origins were deemed unknown, which is why Fritz had never found out that his son was alive. "If I hadn't gone after Rudy, none of this would have happened," he sobbed. "Mama and Henrietta tried to come after me, but they were forced back by the others going down into the cellar, and the door got closed, and then they died. All because I'd run off." "No, Hari," said Richard, still holding the boy and soothing him in his arms. "Rudy wanted to save you all. Animals have a strong instinct for danger. If Mama and Henrietta had managed to follow him, they'd have been saved too. You did the right thing, and your papa will say that to you, I know. He will be so proud of you and Rudy." "But he's not here," wept Hari. "Uncle Richard, tell me the truth. Is Papa dead too?" "No, Hari. Definitely not. We're going to find your papa. I've promised you that." "You don't know anything about Fritz?" Arthur asked Richard very softly. Richard shook his head. "I last saw him a year ago in Cherbourg." "You were both in Cherbourg?" "Yes. We took advantage of everything the war had to offer," replied Richard dryly. "You asked earlier on if I still had the Leica. No, it got lost when I was badly wounded in Cherbourg. If you've got 6 bits of shrapnel in your liver and belly, you don't give much thought to packing. It was Fritz who arranged for me to get home on one of the last transports for the wounded. What became of him after that, well, I still don't know, although I go through the Red Cross lists every week, like today. Although today I was really worked up and looked at the wrong list. Tell McNeil I'm grateful to him. If I hadn't been so angry about the conversation with him, I'd never have ended up looking at the list of orphans instead of the POW list. It's just amazing how good can come from bad." They sat in silence for a while. Arthur eventually spoke. "Is there anything I can do?" "2 things, yes. Make sure these murderers in white coats stand trial for their crimes. And if you have any better sources than the Red Cross for finding out the whereabouts of German prisoners of war and their location, I'd be so grateful if you could do some digging into Fritz's case, so that Hari can have his father back at long last." "For sure," promised Arthur. "Now I think it's time I left you two in peace. May I take these files? They're most enlightening." "Go ahead." Arthur put the files and his newspaper in his briefcase. He hesitated for a moment before reaching into his jacket pocket. "I wanted to ask you a favor, actually. I've been trying to give up smoking. Could you possibly get rid of these for me?" He held out a packet of cigarettes to Richard. "That shouldn't present any problems," said Richard, taking them from him. "Thanks," Arthur said with a grin. "I reckon we'll be meeting again very soon." Then he turned to Hari. "I'll do everything I can to find your papa. You have my word." Chapter 58. After Arthur had gone, the family bombarded Richard with questions. How he'd found Hari, how the child had survived, and what the Englishman had wanted. "It would be so nice if you'd let me eat something first," Richard said in an attempt to fend them all off. "I haven't had a scrap of food, and Hari must be really hungry. But, Frau Koch, look, here's something for you." He gave her Arthur's cigarettes. "They're real British ones." Their old housekeeper's enthusiasm was clear for all to see. "They'll sell on the black market better than German ones. How on earth did you come by those?" Hari's sorrowful look. Paula came in from the kitchen with 2 bowls of lentil soup. "It's only lukewarm." She put the soup in front of Richard and Hari. "That's what happens when you're late home and then spend ages talking to your visitor." "Never mind. At least we won't burn our tongues," Richard said with a playful grin. "You probably do enough of that all by yourself," she said, kissing him lightly on the cheek. Hari savored his soup 1 spoonful at a time while Richard wolfed his down, and then set about answering the family's questions. "That man was Arthur Grifford. Fritz and I met him at El Alamein in 1942. "You met an Englishman in the middle of the war? Had you taken him prisoner or something?" Richard's father was baffled. "Not really, as the Brits would say, although I was pointing my gun at him at the time." Richard laughed softly. "It's a very strange story and certainly wasn't one we could tell anyone at the time." He related the incident in the Egyptian tomb. "This morning I had a pretty unpleasant encounter with a certain McNeil, who seems to view German children as the lowest of the low, and who saw fit to throw me out of his office. I was so furious I couldn't see straight and collided with another officer on my way out. It was Arthur, but I didn't recognize him and rushed off. Well, after that, he made the effort to come and see me and is actually interested in what I had to say. He'd already heard of similar cases at the Children's Hospital at Rotenburgsort." "Does that mean these murders will be looked into at last?" asked Paula's father. "I certainly hope so." Richard then went on to relate how he'd found Hari. "We must find Hari a bed," said Richard's father, "but the sofa will do the job for now." Richard nodded. "I have complete confidence in your organizational skills, Papa." Over the next few days, Richard and Paula worked as normal in their quarters at home. Since January, when they'd started offering general practice as well, the waiting room was always full. Meanwhile, the rest of the family was fully occupied with getting hold of enough food. The schools were still closed, so Emilia and Georg spent a lot of time down at the allotment with Aunt Margit and her family. Someone had to watch over the fruit trees and vegetable beds in case of theft, and the children also enjoyed fishing in the stream where they used to go canoeing. They regularly added a fish or two to the family menu, something that made them both burst with pride. They held no license, so this was technically poaching, and therefore all the more exciting. Hari was very withdrawn in the early days and suffered terrible nightmares. Richard hoped that Arthur would soon find out what had happened to Fritz, and continued to comb through the Red Cross lists himself, but there was no sign of him. Richard found himself wondering if he needed to adjust to the fact that Fritz might have fallen after all. He wondered how he could possibly tell Hari. One Thursday in July, the twins had been especially successful on their little fishing expedition, catching no fewer than 5 fat roach, each one weighing a good kilo or so. The catch was so precious that Carl personally escorted the pair of them home, in case anyone ambushed and robbed them on their way back. Richard's mother and Frau Koch immediately set about gutting and baking the fish. They asked Carl to eat with them, but he had to go back to Moorfleet in time for curfew. Just before 8, the meal was ready to serve. Richard could see they'd be going to bed with full bellies tonight, for the first time in months. They had all just taken their places at the table when the doorbell rang. Frau Koch started from her chair, but Richard was first on his feet. "I'll go. You stay there, thank you, Frau Koch." He assumed it was going to be a patient in urgent need of help before curfew, but when he opened the door he saw an unshaven, hollow-cheeked man in a tattered army uniform. "Fritz!" His friend gave an almost imperceptible nod. They lurched towards each other, and Richard wrapped his arms around his friend, pressing him close before calling out for Hari. "So it's true?" whispered Fritz. "Hari's alive?" Only then did Richard realize that Arthur Grifford was standing behind Fritz in the corridor. But before Richard could reply, Hari had come into the hall of the flat and stopped dead when he saw the man in the torn uniform. Fritz crouched down in front of him. "Hari?" he whispered. "Don't you recognize me?" Hari was stunned. There was an agonizing silence. "Papa!" He threw himself into his father's arms. Fritz held him tight. "You're alive," he whispered, his voice thick with sobs. He lifted the boy up into his arms. "Hari, I'll never leave you alone again. Never. Do you hear?" Hari clung to his father as if he would never let go. "I'm so very sorry for what you must have gone through, Hari." Fritz couldn't hold back the tears now. "But I'll make everything all right again. Everything will be all right again." He kissed his son's forehead, then hugged him close once more. Richard fought back his own tears of joy and relief. He looked over at Arthur. "Thank you. I'll never forget what you've done here." "I had to call in 7 old favors and tell 3 white lies to get him home," replied Arthur. "But to have witnessed this, well, it was all worth it." Deep in thought, he took out a packet of cigarettes and was about to light one, but faltered. "Damn it, I'm supposed to be giving up." He put the cigarette back in the pack. "I keep lapsing. Can you get rid of these for me?" He handed them to Richard. "But of course, for the sake of your health." "Right then. I've got to take the jeep back now and find a way of explaining to my bosses what I was doing out on Lüneburg Heath, why I had a flat tire on the way back and used the spare." "That sounds like a problem." "Sounds to me more like calling in favor number 8, he smiled. "You'll hear from me again in the coming weeks when we tackle Kruger." Chapter 59. Fritz said very little about what had happened to him over the past year. He kept it to their disorderly withdrawal from France and their attempts to get back to Germany. He did disclose that the British had captured them early in April, and they had surrendered without a fight. Fritz had been a prisoner of war at a Lüneburg health camp. "The conditions were appalling," he said. "I saw to the sick and the wounded, but we had nothing, no bandages and no clean water. Many of the wounded died like flies, and then dysentery got most of the others. I tried so many times to get medical supplies from the military administration, but they showed absolutely no mercy. It was easy to see how much they hated and despised us." "How did Arthur get you out?" asked Richard. "No idea. Someone summoned me, said I was needed in Hamburg on the orders of the military administration, and I was to be released. I didn't immediately recognize Arthur, and I told him I would rather die in the dirt there and then with my comrades than lift a finger to help the British administration." This was when Arthur dismissed everyone else from the room. They did exactly what he told them. Interesting, I thought. And then he told me Hari was alive, asked me to be so good as to play along and not wreck everything. I was dumbstruck, literally, so didn't say anything else. So I got my discharge papers and climbed into this terrible old jeep that Arthur had brought along. I still wasn't sure what to make of it all until soon after Lüneburg when we got a flat tire. His casual manner slipped then, and I added some interesting words to my English vocabulary. He was absolutely desperate because he'd borrowed the car on the quiet from one of his colleagues, but not told him he'd be taking it outside Hamburg. On top of that, he had not the faintest idea how to change a tire. I think that was when I started to believe that he really had called in a few favors just to get me back to Hamburg. So I did a quick tire change, showing him how to do it so that he'd know for next time. I've always enjoyed sharing my knowledge with others. Fritz chuckled. I was so shocked when we got to Hamburg. I didn't recognize a thing. St. Georg Hospital is still standing, and I'm sure Professor Wehmeyer would be overjoyed to have you back, said Richard. That sounds wonderful, replied Fritz. First thing tomorrow I'll get registered and sort out my food coupons. Is there anywhere I can get coupons for something to wear? This uniform's all I've got, and Arthur told me all gray uniforms are completely forbidden now, even if you rip off the insignia and everything. Paula, ever practical, chipped in. We can dye your stuff for you. Clothing coupons are useless now. There's no material anywhere, not even for newborns at Finkenau. They get swaddled in newspaper if their parents can't provide baby clothes. I've still got a spare suit, said Paula's father. The trousers will be too short for you, but it'll do. At least you'll be able to go out in the morning looking halfway presentable. Thank you. So it really has come down to the final shirt. Fritz shot Richard a sideways look, and his friend knew exactly what he was getting at. It seemed an eternity since their biggest problem had been getting hold of petrol coupons, and they had joked about never having to share their last shirt because their next would be army issue. Still, we've got a roof over our heads. At least we're not living in some bombed-out flat or in a Nissen hut. You're right there, said Fritz, serious again, and I've got the biggest and best gift in the whole wide world. He stroked Hari's hair while the little boy snuggled in close. Everything else will sort itself out. A fortnight later, Richard closed the practice early one afternoon. Fritz was still at work back in his old job as surgeon and as deputy to Professor Wehmeyer. Richard thought there had probably been an emergency, as Fritz usually came home on time to take care of Hari. He turned up 2 hours late, grinning from ear to ear. Look what I've got. He held out an old sack to Richard and took from it several bottles of beer. Where the devil did you find those? Fritz laughed. It was a bit of an archaeological expedition into the cellar of a bombed-out pub. I'd treated the publican this morning because he'd broken his arm in his efforts to rescue all his old stock. Once I'd got him in a cast, I told him he didn't need to stay in, and it was time for me to pack up for the day, so I went with him to help retrieve his goods from the cellar. And here's my share. I've no idea what it'll taste like. It's been down there for a good 2 years, but the bottle tops are still sealed and not damaged. I didn't think surgeons ever met anyone interesting, just stuffy doctors. It's the interesting people who take the risks. They're the ones who end up in hospital, Fritz said with a grin. Where's Hari? He's gone down to the allotment with my parents and the twins. And where's everyone else? Paula's sitting on the balcony with Frau Koch, and her father's reading in his room. Good. That means we can take over the kitchen and drink our beer without being disturbed. The beer was rather cloudy, and it took a few gulps to get used to the taste, but it was drinkable. I'd say that either the time in the cellar and the heat of the firestorm have raised the alcohol content, or I just can't take my drink anymore, said Fritz. The first glass had gone down a treat. It's pretty strong, agreed Richard. So when was the last time we had a beer together? Cherbourg, 4 days before you were wounded. That's it. I remember the shelling seemed quite far off then. And now there's no shelling at all. The world may have been reduced to ruins, but at least there's peace. Fritz poured more beer for both of them. Here's to peace. The doorbell rang as they clinked glasses. So much for peace, Fritz groaned as Richard went to answer the door. Arthur, this is a surprise. Come in. He led Arthur straight to the kitchen. Hello, Arthur, said Fritz. You've come at just the right time. Do you fancy a beer? Arthur looked at the bottles on the table in amazement. Where on earth did you get that? Archaeological expeditions into dark caves have always rather appealed, haven't they? This item is in mint condition. Mid-war wear, I should say, 1943. Heated through once and then sealed under a pile of stones, Fritz said with a grin. Pasteurized beer, you might say. Still drinkable. Help yourself. No, thanks. What can we do for you? Asked Richard. I wanted to let you know that we're going to deal with Kruger on Monday, and I'd like you to come with me, Richard. You know your way around the hospital and where the files are kept. What time should I get there? I'll pick you up here at 9. Kruger will be overjoyed, said Fritz dryly. Pity I'll be in the operating theater. I'd love to be a fly on the wall and see him get what he deserves. He'll get that all right, stated Arthur. He glanced at the cloudy beer in Richard's glass. You're really drinking that. I just hope you're still in the land of the living on Monday.
This is the end of disc number 9. Please insert disc number 10.